Hey guys, you are watching your anime world. How are you all? Please support to subscribe this channel for watching new interesting stories. So in this video, we will see second part, what if Deku was given an Ultimatrix. Here is short summary. With the creation of a new Ultimatrix, an ailing Ben Tennyson agrees to send the machine into another dimension. Enter Izuku Midoriya, a young, powerless boy within a super-powered society with dreams of being a hero. Now, armed with the Ultimatrix, will he be able to carve out his own heroic legacy, or fall to the villains that want the device for themselves? But before we start, if you want more stuff like this, then be sure to subscribe and like this video. And if possible, share this video with your friends. Now let's start the story. All actions had their unique consequences. It was a fact that Professor Paradox all too familiar with. Yes, he knew that interfering with Earth Omega's timelines concerning Himiko Toga would invoke the wrath of certain beings. Yet he did not expect that wrath to be in the form of such an important figure. When one looked upon the shadowy form of the Celestial Sapiens, many would notice that they seemed to never move from a single spot, as the act of a simple blink of an eye would take their dual personalities millennia to decide upon. However, the one that materialized before him was unique in that she only had a single, united consciousness. This was the Lady Anastasia, the High Celestial of the Forge of Creation. Her judgment was swift, fair and harsh at times, yet she was one of the few Celestial Sapiens that was not openly hostile toward him. As with all Celestial Sapiens, Starflower had no discerning features, save for the curvaceous shape of her body and her melodious voice. As he had been expecting a visit from the near-omnipotent race, Professor Paradox had set up a table with a pot of freshly brewed tea waiting to be served. "You have been expecting me." It was not a question. Paradox nodded and gestured for her to sit. "Indeed, I did not expect my actions in Earth Omega's time stream to go without a visit from your people." The professor smiled while the lady seated herself across from him. "Though I did not expect you to come in person, my lady." If the Celestial could smile, she would have. "I do believe that my brethren would have acted rashly in their treatment of you," she said while he poured a cup for her. "You know that you are not well liked by my people." He gave a sad smile. "I do, and I wish it were otherwise," the man sighed as he sat back in his chair. "Though I do hold hope that since you have deigned to visit my little pocket dimension yourself, you will see reason within my transgression." Anastasia raised her cup to her face where her mouth would have been and drank. "I will attempt to be fair in my judgment, Paradox, however you know that the Multiverse Preservation Act forbids what you have done." She sat the cup down and laced her fingers together to lean on her elbow. "However, I will hear your side of the story. I wish to know why you would provoke the ire of my people for the sake of a single human female." Paradox smiled and nodded his thanks. "To know my reasoning is to look back into this young woman's life." He waved his hand toward the dimensional wall surrounding his home. An image of Toga Himiko appeared before them. Her quirk, as people call their superpowers in this world, is vampiric in nature. The image changed to one of the same young girl being terrorized by her father. Her parents, who do not care for those with quirks, treated her cruelly, even going so far as to force quirk-suppressing drugs upon her. He explained, seeing the Celestial Sapien's eyes narrow. "There are similar narcotics in your own universe," Anastasia said as she regarded the image with scrutiny. "Very few of them held any sway over superpowered individuals. And it would prove to be a fatal mistake on their part." The image changed again to one that saw the young girl with a feral expression on her face. The drugs would play havoc on her mental strength, and because her parents starved her of blood, she committed horrendous atrocities against her people when her hunger reached the breaking point. The image changed to show the girl grinning maniacally with her fangs showing to be covered in blood as she held a knife in front of her. Yet, in another timeline, she went on to aid the heroes of her world, and became a wonderful person. The image of the girl changed again, showing the girl in an older form, her belly swollen with child. Around her knees was a little boy that appeared to have ashen blonde hair begging for her attention. Anastasia could not deny the look of happiness on the young woman's face. "This is quite the contrasting future," the Celestial Sapien said, "but it hardly warrants your interference." "In a way, it does." The image changed to show a city in ruin. "You see, had I left this child alone, then she would go on to cause untold chaos and strife until her capture and subsequent execution." The image wavered again to show the city untouched. However, now that I have ensured that she will be given a kind and loving home, she becomes just as kind and as caring as those that now care for her, and the world is a brighter place because of it. He gave the High Celestial a sorrowful look. As you can see, all she truly needed was a single act of kindness, and she would have remained the sweet, innocent girl that she should have been. Starflower listened, her face showing no signs of sympathy or anger, yet when she leaned back to sit straight, Paradox couldn't help but tense. I understand why you have deemed it necessary to help this child, Paradox, she said while the man remained tense. However, you have placed me in an exceedingly difficult situation. Her shoulders seemed to drop. As you know, it was just barely tolerated when you brought the Ultimatrix into Earth Omega's universe, and lesser still that you are communicating with the new wielder. Forgive me, my lady, but I cannot bring myself to regret my actions, he said as he sipped his tea. When I chose Izuku Midoriya as the new wielder of the Ultimatrix, I knew that I was denying him a very great, yet harsh destiny, he went on as he showed her another window into the future, one in which Izuku did not possess the Ultimatrix. Look at how greatly Earth Omega's future differs from just that one action, he said, showing the boy he had placed his trust in standing alone on a field of battle. Anastasia watched as the boy, whom she knew had been a small, bright child once, was now a scarred and worn young adult. His clothes were tattered and covered in blood and filth. With a wave of his hand, Paradox changed to scene one last time. Izuku Midoriya appeared to her again, the same bright and smiling child she remembered before Paradox made his choice. At his side stood two other children that she knew had become his closest friends. And on his wrist was the Ultimatrix. Running toward him were blurred images of people he had yet to form bonds with, yet they were solidifying, which meant that soon, the boy would have more people that he could rely on. One of them, however, was clear to her, the girl, Himiko Toga. Paradox lowered his hand, allowing the visions to fade. Now you see, the man said, I cannot bring myself to regret my actions. He lowered his gaze to the tea table between them. I understand that you must uphold your laws, but I beg of you, do not make me undo my work. Anastasia looked at him with pity in her eyes. I will not do that, she said to the man, making him smile with a small amount of hope. However, I do not believe that you are telling me the entire story of this new timeline. The professor looked away for a moment before letting out a sigh. There is a blackened timeline that breaks away from the brighter future I see for this child and those around him. He relented as he waved his hand, causing a flowing streak to appear. Anastasia observed that there were three separate branches in the flow. The one that Izuku appeared to have inherited his power from his mentor appeared bronze in color. A sign that the future was a harsh one. The golden timeline in which the boy had received the Ultimatrix branched out at the same spot as the bronze timeline. However, further up the line, there existed a third branch. This one is black as the deepest recesses of space where no star would glow. Oh, dear, she rose to examine the timeline. Paradox, what have you done? The professor shook his head. Not I, my lady, he said with a heavy tone. He sighed and rose to stand next to her. This tainted flow of time was born of something that I could not have foreseen. Anastasia continued to stare at the inky black flow, then turned to the man. Show me. Paradox gave a slow wave of his hand and opened a window into the bleak future of his chosen hero. Toshinori checked his face and hair in the mirror of his truck, making sure that there was nothing amiss or out of place. These injuries are more of a curse aside from the fact that I can only work as a hero for a short amount of time. He sighed at his reflection. What I wouldn't give to look normal again, he said. Next to him was a sandy blonde man with wide-rimmed glasses and a blue buttoned-up shirt. I've never seen you fuss over your appearance before, Toshi, he said with a hint of teasing in his voice. This lady friend of yours must be something special for you to think about looking good in front of her when you're not bulked up as All Might. Toshinori sighed, his shoulders slumping. She's the only woman I've ever met that didn't care about this sickly appearance of mine. He gestured to himself, and she sees me as, well, me, not the hero I used to be. He groaned. I can only imagine her reaction if she ever found out who I really am. Well, if you want things to work out between the two of you, then you're gonna have to tell her sooner or later, his friend said, but that's not coming anytime soon, I think. Why do you say that? David? Toshinori asked as they pulled up to the apartment complex. David shrugged. Well, you barely managed to work up the courage to tell me, and then Melissa a few years ago, he said, and you love her like your own daughter, so if you're serious about this woman, then you'll probably bodyfoot around the whole thing for years. I've never actually taken her out on one date, Toshinori sighed as he parked the truck and undid his seatbelt. I'm sure that young Midoriya wouldn't mind us going dating, but Inko seems skittish of me. He got out of the truck and dusted himself off. Anyway, let's get going. Young Midoriya seems to think that those plans he's got will have you drooling. David chuckled as he got out and stretched his arms above his head. If the kid's as brilliant as you say he is, then I very well might. He said as the two of them made their way up to the Midoriya apartment. They were met at the elevator by a woman with ashen blonde hair and a pink blouse. What floor, ma'am? Toshinori asked as he was the closest to the board. Fourth, please, she said. That's a coincidence, Toshinori muttered as he pressed in the floor button before taking a better look at the woman. Madam, forgive me for asking, but would your family name happen to be Bakugo? The woman smiled widely. Ah, you must know my son. She said with a laugh. I hope he didn't leave too bad of an impression on you. Nothing that I can't forget about, Toshinori said. You must be heading to the Midoriya household. We were heading there ourselves to talk to young Izuku. Mitsuki Bakugo then grinned even wider. So you're Mr. Yagi, she said loudly as the floor indicator pinged and the doors opened. Inko's told me quite so much about you. David chuckled and elbowed him playfully. Nothing too outlandish, I hope. Toshinori chuckled while he shoved his friend away from him. The woman just laughed full and loud. Oh, she thinks you're the greatest thing since sliced bread, sweetie, she laughed, but if you're wondering if she's hearing wedding bells in the future, then I'm afraid you're really gonna have to work on that one. David laughed and laughed at Toshinori's absolutely neon blush. Oh, Lord, Melissa's never gonna let you hear the end of this. He laughed as the woman looked at the man in question. Oh, Melissa's my daughter, and Tashi's goddaughter. He explained as the woman nodded in understanding before he pulled out his phone and showed her a recent picture of the three of them, Toshinori in his shrunken form of course. Oh, she's beautiful, the woman smiled before she sighed dramatically. I wish I'd had the chance to have a daughter. But with my brat's attitude, I'm actively afraid that he might get too rough with a new baby. Toshinori looked at her as they came up to the apartment. Surely not. The elevator stopped and the trio filed out. The woman sighed with a thoughtful expression of her face. I don't think he would, Mitsuki admitted while they came to the Midoriya apartment, but if you've met him, then you know that he's not kid-friendly. David chose not to say anything on the subject and rang the doorbell. Inside there was a muffled shuffling of feet as someone came to the door. It was opened by a very much half-asleep Mei Hatsume who, thankfully, had appropriate sleepwear on. Toshinori raised his brow at the girl, Hatsume. She blinked at him sleepily, seeming to just barely recognize him. What in the world happened? You look like you've barely slept at all. Mei nodded with a huge yawn. You don't know the half of it, she said sleepily. We got in really late last night, so everyone's still asleep. The skinny blonde was a little surprised. What happened? He heard Mitsuki ask from behind him. Inko's never been one to stay out late. Is everything all right? Toshinori asked. Mei nodded sleepily. Yeah, we're all fine, just worn out. She stepped aside and allowed them in. Once inside, the three adults were shocked to find that not only Mei had stayed over. Izuku was sprawled out in one of the chairs, his legs over one arm while his head was draped across the other. Another boy that Toshinori didn't recognize was half laying on the couch on his stomach, looking like he would fall off at any moment. And on the other couch was yet another girl that Toshinori didn't know. Slumber party? David asked with a slight chuckle, but Mei was shaking her head. No. It's a long story, the pink-haired mechanic yawned, but a lot happened and, well, we made a few new friends. Mitsuki just smiled at her. That's never a bad thing. She shrugged and headed off into the kitchen. Either of you two handy in the kitchen? Right behind you. David smiled while rolling up his sleeves, though I hope you don't mind bacon and eggs. Mitsuki grinned. Just set the table and get the coffee going, the woman said. I'll whip something up for everyone. Mei wobbled back to one of the open chairs where she sat and curled up, intent on getting more sleep. Toshinori chuckled as the girl dropped off almost immediately, not even bothering to pull the discarded blanket back over herself. He stepped around them, careful not to wake anyone, and draped it back over her. Then he helped the boy back onto the couch. All he did was mumble something in his sleep and roll over onto his back. He went over to Izuku then and put one of the cushions under his head so he wouldn't wake up sore. The other girl seemed to be fine, though she seemed to be curled up in a ball pretty tightly, almost like a cat, but she seemed comfortable and very deeply asleep. The smell of coffee drifted to his nose as he heard David and Mitsuki talking in the kitchen softly. Then he heard shuffling in the next room, and saw Inko's bedroom door creak open. The woman was still in her pajamas and rubbing still out of her eyes. Her eyes were all red and puffy and her hair was utter bird's nest, but Toshinori couldn't remember ever seeing a more adorable sight. Except the next moment when she saw him standing there amongst the sleeping children. Her mouth opened wide, almost letting out a scream before she clamped her hands over her mouth. Her entire face was aflame while her eyes were wide and watery with embarrassment. "Chi Toshi," she squeaked. What are you? How did you?" He held up his hand to stall her. "May let us in." "U.S." She yelped before she looked down at herself, yelped, and dove back into her room. Toshinori snickered as a few moments later the poor woman came back out, properly dressed, though her clothes were all wrinkled as if she'd just thrown them on in haste. Her hair had been brushed, or had a comb dragged through it to at least keep it in place. Her face was still flaming red. She cleared her throat. What are you doing here so early?" He chuckled while he took one of her hands and kissed the back of her knuckles. She gave a little squeak. "I'm sorry for scaring you," he said. "I came by to speak with Mei and Izuku about the blueprints they wanted to sell. We ran into Mrs. Bakugo on the way." He jerked his thumb toward the kitchen. "She and my friend are working on breakfast. David should have some coffee ready if you want a cup." Inko sighed. "Oh, yes, please," she said in a tired voice. "I've got so much to tell you." Toshinori glanced at the sleeping children. So it would seem. Himiko was certain that she was in heaven. Or somewhere really close to it. She sure wasn't in her room. It was too warm, and the mat she usually slept on wasn't nearly as soft as when she was laying on now. Add to the fact that there was the delicious smell of food wafting to her nose along with the invigorating smell of coffee, and she knew that she was no longer in her own home. Opening her eyes slowly, she saw Mei sleeping next to her in an armchair, bundled up like a bagworm with just her head poking up above her blanket. Shinso was laying on his back on a couch, one arm and leg dangling off of it while he snored away. "Oh, I remember them," she thought as a warm feeling entered her chest. She then looked down and saw the green-haired boy sleeping curled up in another armchair. "These guys are my friends." The thought brought a sleepy smile to her face. Then she felt a soft brush against her hair, causing her to look up and see the green-haired woman that had been so nice to her smiling down at her. "Good morning, dear," she said quietly. "Did you sleep well?" The girl nodded. "Yeah, I slept really good." She sighed. "Do I need to get up now?" Inko just patted her head. "Not unless you want to, dear," she said. "You've had a rough time, and you most certainly need more rest." She told her while the girl seemed to snuggle deeper into her blanket. "We'll keep some food back for you, and you shouldn't worry about blood." Himiko looked at her with confusion. "The hospital I work for was willing to supply us with enough to keep you going for a while." Himiko's heart gave a painful stutter. "I never knew people could be so nice," she said tearfully. "You don't even know me, but don't you even think on it anymore, dear," Inko said as she ran her fingers through her hair. "You're with us now, which practically makes you family." She giggled as the girl blushed. "You know, dear, I've always wanted a daughter." Izuku groaned before she could form a response and sat up, rubbing his neck. "Please tell me that's coffee I smell." Inko giggled as the boy cracked his neck. "Izuku, don't do that," she admonished lightly. "It's not good for you." "But yes, there's coffee, and breakfast, too," she finished as the other children began stirring. "Toshinori and Mitsuki came over and decided to cook for us. Isn't that nice?" "Food sounds good," Hitoshi yawned. Coffee sounds better. I like mine strong. Mei stretched, almost falling out of her chair. Just then the blonde man that had come with Toshinori poked his head out of the kitchen. I made it extra strong, he called out as Izuku and Mei looked in his direction, and both of their eyes bugged out of their heads. Holy crap, you're David's shield. Mei shrieked. Hitoshi rubbed his ears. Geez, Mei. He's All Might's first sidekick and the best support gear designer there is. Izuku blared out even louder than Mei. Now both Himiko and Hitoshi were rubbing their ears. Inko shook her head. I'm sorry about them. She apologized to both deafened children, and the blonde American, they tend to get a little excited whenever they meet someone like you. She chuckled as Himiko sat up, rubbing the sleep out of her eyes. We might as well eat, Hitoshi said as he looked at the girl. These two probably won't stop fangirling until they leave. Mei looked at him offended. Hey, I'll have you know that I have never, ever fangirled over anyone, thank you very much. She snapped with her hands on her hips, then pointed at David. This guy might just be buying some of the designs Izuku's got, and that. Izuku scrambled across the floor and clamped his hands over the girl's mouth. Mei, come on, we don't even know why he's here. Mei frowned underneath his hands, throwing them off, and unbalancing the boy. Bo-oing, which led to his hands landing on Mei's bodies. Hey, sorry. Mei covered her chest as Izuku dropped to the floor. You pinched a nipple. Hitoshi sat with a wide-eyed look on his face, and shook his head. Oh, you lucky bastard. Himiko was practically biting her tongue to keep from laughing. Of course, the adults had no reservations about their laughter and were howling at the outraged look on Mei's face, while Izuku was on his hands and knees bowing his head to the floor stammering out, I'm sorry, over and over again. David wiped a stray tear from his eye. Your house certainly is lively, he complimented the woman as she sighed, wishing for the 100th time that Mei would take an interest in her son. But then again, given her son's luck, he may yet get a girlfriend and make her a few grandchildren. Breakfast, even after things calmed down, was a loud affair. David and Toshinori told stories of their youth, both of them leaving out any stories that could relate to All Might, many of them ending up with the pair getting into trouble, which had the rest of the group laughing. Mitsuki chuckled while Toshinori finished speaking. You two sure were a wild pair. She laughed. I can't imagine what you were like in your prime, Toshinori, no offense. Toshinori just waved it off. None taken, Mrs. Bakugo, he gestured to himself. I used to look a lot different before I was injured. David nodded. It's true, he said, the guy used to be as wide as refrigerator. Hitoshi glanced at the skeleton of a man. Guess that just shows how hard hero work is. He said, wondering how the man had worked in the past. Toshinori nodded. Yes, hero work is dangerous, he said, then turned his attention to Izuku and his friends, which brings up quite the little story. Inko told us about what happened last night. Izuku jumped in his chair with his fork halfway to his mouth. Well, Now, I'm not admonishing you, the man said, shaking his head, it's not my place. If anything, I'd think your mother would have done so already. Mei and Izuku blushed a little. In truth, the woman had been bawling her eyes out so much it was hard to tell if she was angry, sad, or happy. In Himiko's case, the girl had almost been smothered by motherly affection before being brought into the Midoriya household. No, what I really want to say is that, were you two young interns, I'm quite proud of how you handled things. Toshinori went on and looked at the young blonde girl at the table, who was now sipping on a cup of tea that Inko had made for her. And I'm sorry that you had to go through something like that for so long, young lady. Himiko didn't reply. How could she? No one had ever thought she was in trouble before. Izuku's becoming quite the little hero already, isn't he, Inko? Mitsuku said as the woman smiled proudly before she looked at the young man. Too bad that the first person you rescued was that ungrateful brat of mine. She sighed. I found out later that you were the one that saved him from that sludge villain a few months ago. Izuku just chuckled. Oh, it's okay, I'm used to it after all this time. Young Midoriya, if I hadn't stopped him, he would have attacked you. Toshinori said, drawing the mother's attentions. He was ready to use his quirk on you and everything. He what? Mitsuki shouted loudly. reminded the blonde man of the boy in question. What exactly do you mean by that? Just what I said, Toshinori said, I wouldn't lie about something like that. Mei looked disgusted. Geez, the guy sounds like. She trailed off when something occurred to her and she turned to Izuku. Hey, wait a minute, recovery girl mentioned something about you surviving a bomb blast or something. What? Inko shouted. Mei, Izuku yelped, feeling betrayed. What? It's true. She crossed her arms. So was it the same guy that you saved? Mitsuki just leaned on her hands. It has to be him, she groaned. Auntie, really, it's no big deal. Izuku tried to make her feel better. David thought it best to try to divert the conversation for the boys' sake. Speaking of deals, what about those blueprints you wanted me to see, Toshi? Toshinori, however, wasn't going to be so easily fooled. Young Midoriya, just how bad did he hurt you to get recovery girl to notice? Izuku didn't answer. He felt too embarrassed. Shinso answered for him. She guessed that he's not been sleeping well. He began with his friend giving him a pleading look. Nightmares. Sensitivity to loud noises. She wants him to see Hound Dog when he gets into the school. As he spoke, Izuku's face just became redder and redder while Mitsuki looked like she was ready to start crying. Toshinori pinched the bridge of his nose. Post-traumatic stress disorder. He groaned. I should have seen it sooner. No wonder your confidence is so low. Mei looked at the man. Recovery girl also said that he has a pretty low opinion of himself. Suddenly Mitsuki stood up, her face an angry pale color. Inko, I'll call you later. Right now I think that boy and I need to have a serious talk. Inko rose to stop her. It won't do any good, Mitsuki, he's in school right now. I don't care. The woman snapped. I knew that he had an attitude, but this goes well beyond what I'm willing to tolerate. Hell, you should think about pressing charges. Mitsuki, he's your son. Inko looked appalled. Her friend gestured to Izuku, and he's as good as my nephew. If I'd known sooner, you can bet that I'd have given that brat the beating of a lifetime. While the two women continued to argue back and forth about what to do about their sons, David took the time to clean his glasses. I really stepped in it this time, didn't I? He muttered, glancing at his friend, Toshi, about those blueprints. Izuku placed something in front of him. I'm really sorry about all of this, Mr. Shield, he sighed while looking at his two friends. They were just trying to help me. David just smiled at the boy while he picked up the notebook he had placed in front of him. That's what friends do, young man, he said, looking at the four children. Himiko having remained quiet through the entire exchange, they look out for each other, and have each other's backs when there's trouble. He said while Toshinori nodded in agreement, just don't take after me and this skinny lug since he was always making us late for our classes. Toshinori sputtered, that was one time, and I made up for it, didn't I? It was 6 times, and a meal for each time hardly makes up for the ass chewing we got when the teachers had had enough. David said with a grin in his direction as he started thumbing through the book. He adjusted his glasses once while Mei and Izuku were holding their breaths. Himiko looked over towards Shinso and whispered, hey, is he really that big of a deal? Shinso gave her a small smirk. Sure is, he said while the man continued to read over the plans. He's made all of All Might's hero costumes, and he's made gear and costumes for some of the biggest names in the business. His tech is used worldwide. Ooh, Himiko sounded mildly impressed. Meanwhile, as David continued to read and the two women continued to argue, Izuku and Mei were waiting for the man's response. Suddenly his glasses gleamed and he snapped the book shut. Young man, you have no idea how much I've waited for something like this, he said as he held the book up, which stopped Inko and Mitsuki from squabbling. The tech in here is beyond anything I've ever seen. I don't know how you came by it, but if it was left to you in good faith, I can only imagine that it was meant to be used, he said as he looked at the young man. So how much do you want for it? Which design were you looking at? Izuku asked naively. David just chuckled. Oh, you misunderstand, Mr. Midoriya, he smiled, I want all of it. Izuku and Mei's jaws hit the table while Inko's eyes welled up with happy tears and Mitsuki was grabbing a roll of paper towels for her. Izuku and Mei looked at each other, the latter of which shrugged, it's your tech. Your price tag, she said. Izuku thought for a moment, would it be possible to put the designs for the proto-tools in our names? He gestured to himself and May respectively. I'd like those at least to stay with us. David gave a nod. Understandable, they are extremely versatile and would do well in the police forces as capture weapons. If you can do that, then I'd say just name a price, Izuku said, that way May and I could get royalties from the proto-tools and not have to worry about future funding. The man chuckled. We can draw up a contract for them later, he said as he reached into his pocket and took out his checkbook. I assume that you want half of whatever I pay to go to Miss Hatsume, correct? Yes, sir, Izuku smiled as May beamed at him. David began writing out numbers while Toshinori read over his shoulder, a grin coming to the man's face. In addition to the proto-tools, I'll also put your names on the rest of the tech. May squealed with delight at that while Izuku just kept smiling. Please, tell me if this is too small a price, and keep in mind that this is only half of it. An equal amount will be going to Miss Hatsume. He tore the check out and handed it over to the teens. Upon seeing the price, however, May's grew to the size of dinner plate while Izuku promptly passed out. Sir, I think you might have missed a decimal somewhere. May yelped. This is the gross amount that Endeavor gets paid. Oh, that's not yen, miss, David said, it's American dollars. May promptly joined Izuku on the floor. The following day that Izuku sold his designs was when the Midoriya household was completely empty. Both Hitoshi and May had to return home in order to finish up their school work, while Inko and Mitsuki took Himiko out shopping for the day. Izuku, meanwhile, was being driven to his school to take his final exams. Toshinori had arrived earlier and offered to take him since he'd let his mother have the car to shop. Nervous, the man asked as they drove along, I'm sure that Aldera holds some fairly bad memories for you. Izuku shook his head and smiled at his mentor. No, sir, I'm all right, really. He said, looking down at the Ultimatrix, it may not be an actual quirk, but the Ultimatrix is helping me achieve my dream of becoming a hero, so they can't make me feel useless anymore. He smiled, and I've been studying like crazy. It'll be great to finally get it over with and start cramming for UA's courses. Toshinori chuckled. It was good that the boy was so confident in his academics. Truth be told, when he had spoken to Nezu about the school in question, they had found out quite a bit that had been ignored. Not only was the Bakugo boy openly using his quirk in classes, but so were other students. Not to the extent that Bakugo seemed to be doing, but unsanctioned quirk use was unsanctioned quirk use. That alone was enough to get the teachers in plenty of hot water. But it had also been discovered that the school had a very biased view on quirks and those without them. Izuku's file had been pulled by the principal, and the mammal had been shocked. It seemed that, on paper, Izuku Midoriya was viewed as a delinquent. While the opposite could be said of anyone that had a quirk. Aside from the single quirkless individual in their school, the other students were completely perfect little angels. Toshinori had scoffed at such a thing. He had walked through those halls, and found nothing but a cesspit of bad behavior. After the school year was finished, he would ensure that the school was procured and restaffed. Nezu had mentioned once about broadening UA's educational horizons, and setting up a middle school would be the perfect starting point. Toshinori thought it was a very good idea. The younger the potential students were, the better trained and educated they would become once they entered the high school. There was another thing that Toshinori noticed. According to what I've seen of your school records, your grades are just barely up to scratch, he muttered quietly, though the boy was able to hear him perfectly fine. But I'm pretty sure that I answered all of the questions on my homework right. I even checked the internet to be safe. The boy said with a huge frown on his face. Why would they? Toshinori growled in the back of his throat, probably because they see you as a liability, even if you, technically, have a quirk now. He said, there's so few people that are quirkless nowadays that the discrimination has gotten to near racial levels. Izuku looked saddened by this. He tried his best every day, and to find out that his school was the biggest problem he had was worse than whenever Katsuki would berate him for his unrealistic dreams. They pulled into the school not long after the revelation and parked. Toshinori was tempted to bulk himself up into All Might, just to scare the life out of the faculty members, but he resisted. No need to turn the whole thing into a media circus nightmare. He would settle for seeing his young apprentice graduate from this horrible school, and enter UA as the young hero that he was. Knowing that they were coming, Izuku's former principal was waiting for them outside of the school with a fake smile on his face which tightened when he saw the skeletal man next to him. "Wonderful to see you back, Mr. Midoriya," the man said, expecting a stammering reply from the boy, but was greeted with the coldest look he had ever seen on the boy's face before. Let's proceed to the testing room, shall we?" Izuku nodded and stepped into the school. The man wasn't expecting the hero agent to follow behind him. "I'm sorry, sir, but given the circumstances, I'm afraid that All Might has taken an interest in the boy," Toshinori said evenly, making the man pale. "Where do you think he's been ever since I pulled him out, He turned on the man with a hard stare. He gestured to the boy next to them. "Look at him. Does he look the same as before?" Izuku's training before he had been forced to slow down had seen the boy flourish. He was still lean, but his arms and legs were now strong, and sculpted with hard-earned muscle. He was even slightly taller than he remembered at around 5'7", where he had only been an even 5 feet tall before. And there was a look in the boy's eyes that he hadn't seen before. Toshinori then took hold of the man's lapels, reminding the man that, while his body didn't look it, Toshinori himself was far stronger than he appeared. "If this boy's scores are sabotaged in any way, shape or form, then not only will you face me, but the entire legal team that supports Might Towers. I'll have you behind bars in Tartarus before you can say I am here." The man gulped audibly. "Right, I assure you that nothing of the sort will happen under our care," he said rather meekly. "Now, if you'll follow me, please." He shook himself free of Toshinori's grasp and sped down the hall to put some distance between them. The pair followed at a slower pace, of course, Izuku taking the time to have one last look at his old school. There were still many students in the school, all of whom were taking the exact same exam that he was about to. He tried not to worry about them. It no longer mattered to him what happened to them after they graduated. He didn't necessarily hate them, no, he couldn't. But there was nothing between himself and them that could make him want to care anymore. They were bullies, all of them. "Here we are," the principal said as he brought them to an empty classroom. "I think you'll find this room satisfactory." Izuku didn't argue as he entered the room, finding a solitary desk waiting for him. He was glad it was empty. He wouldn't have to put up with any questions, jeers, or jibes at him while he worked. The principal followed behind him, and placed a yellow folder in front of him. "These are your exams for each class you've taken up to this point," he said. "You may take your time in finishing them, I'm sure you'll need it." Before Izuku could open the folder and get started, Toshinori surged into the room and snatched it up. He pulled the testing papers out and looked them over, Izuku wondering why until he saw the principal losing what little color he had left in his face. Toshinori looked at the man then with a bright gleam in his darkened eyes. "I believe I told you to keep this fair, did I not?" he asked as he held up the papers. "These are for college students." Well, sir, you see. Young Midoriya, Toshinori said with a deceptively calm tone. "I think an online test would be better for you." He gave the boy a small smile. "Now, why don't you go outside and wait by the truck? This man and I need to have a little chat." His eyes had a very dangerous gleam in them as he turned back to the principal. "I shouldn't be long." Izuku chuckled nervously, and, honestly, he wanted to feel sorry for the principal. But he just couldn't quite make himself do so. He went out into the hall and shut the door just as he heard his mentor begin shouting angrily at the man. He could almost picture Toshinori turning into All Might for a moment from the tone he was using, but apparently he was used to dealing with people like this. He started down the hall and toward the exit, managing to get halfway there before he felt a familiar grip land on his shoulder. The grip tightened as he was forcibly slammed into the lockers, his hand flying to his Ultimatrix on instinct before he realized who his attacker was. Katsuki Bakugo was standing there, looking more furious than he could ever remember. His teeth were clenched so tight that he could hear them grinding against each other, and his eyes were burning with pure hatred. His hands were already smoldering, ready to explode in a moment's notice. "You little shit," his voice was calm, do you have any idea what you've done to me? Auntie Mitsuki must have confronted him, the boy thought idly. But the boy that would have cowered before the explosive teen had long since been put away. He reached up and wrapped his fingers around his former friend's wrist. Let go of me, Bakugo. The boy said. Katsuki's eyes widened at the teen. Whatever you think I've done, I have no idea what you're talking about. Katsuki hauled back and slammed him against the lockers again, which was actually starting to make him angry. Oh, like you don't know. He snapped, because of you, I've been made a laughingstock. He growled, leaning in close so that he wasn't heard. All these bodying extras that used to give me the respect I deserve won't stop talking about you. You and that stupid new quirk of yours. He snapped, and you wanna know something else? The old hag even got on my case. And you think that I'm to blame? Izuku asked, surprising the blonde as he wouldn't normally talk back to him. It wasn't even me that told her about what you've done. What I've done? A small pop went off at his palm. The only thing I've ever done is made sure a loser like you knows his place, beneath my feet. And who made you the one to decide that? Izuku demanded. Can't you even see what you've become? The boy looked at his former friend with sympathy. I used to admire you, Bakugo, because I saw the hero you could be. Katsuki's hold on his shoulder loosened, but the minute you started treating people like they didn't have any feelings, like they didn't matter. I couldn't just stand by and let you hurt people like some villain. The look in Bakugo's eyes turned wild. Villain? You think I'm acting like a villain? He looked down at his wrist, spotting the Ultimatrix with Izuku's hand hovering near the dial. He gave the boy a wild grin. What about you? I bet you're itching to get some payback on me, aren't you? Come on, let's see what you're made of. Izuku's hand almost touched the Ultimatrix. But he let it fall to his side. Katsuki glared at him. A few months ago, I would have taken you up on that. Izuku said as he shook off the other boy's hand. I wanted so much to show you that I'm not the useless boy you used to beat up all the time, that I'm not a Deku. So what? Tiny crackling explosions came from Katsuki's palms. Come on and show me what you've got, mister. I've got a quirk now. Izuku just shook his head and walked away from him. I've got nothing to prove, least of all to you. He said, which only made the boy angrier. You were never really my friend, I know that now, but I don't. I don't hate you. But from this point on I want nothing to do with you, ever again. With that, the boy walked away, leaving a completely dumbfounded Katsuki behind him. Toshinori, having finished talking with the principal, had heard part of the conversation and was grinning ear to ear. Maybe those other kids are actually helping with his PTSD. He thought hopefully as he moved to catch up with the boy. Katsuki, meanwhile, ignoring the man passing him by, was seething. That little shit. His teeth were clenched so tightly that he could taste blood. Fine. If that's the way you wanna play this, then just wait. I'll destroy you. This really is a nice car, Mitsuki commented as they drove toward the shopping center. It's lucky that Izuku's quirk lets him build stuff like this. Think of all the free stuff he could build out of garbage. She laughed. Inko gave a light chuckle herself. Oh, I don't think we're going to have to worry about paying for things for some time, she reminded her friend. What with my half of everything from my divorce and Izuku selling those blueprints, I think things are going to be looking up from now on. She looked back into the back seat where Himiko was sitting quietly, sipping on a cup of synthetic blood. Which means you don't need to feel guilty about anything we buy for you today, sweetie. The girl chewed on the straw nervously. I still don't know what's supposed to happen to me after all of this is done. She said, I mean, do I just get passed around in foster care until I turn 18? Inko looked outraged. Absolutely not. She snapped, turning almost fully around, forcing Mitsuki to grab a hold of the wheel. You've been through far too much to go through nonsense like that. I'll adopt you before they even think of passing you to another family. Inko, the road, Mitsuki yelled as the position the woman was in forced her foot deeper into the acceleration. While Inko turned back around to get the car back under control, Himiko was actually feeling more stunned than she had when she found out that her parents were no longer going to hurt her. You'd really adopt me? Of course, she said adamantly, though her tone was much softer now as she looked in the rearview mirror. I told you that I've always wanted a daughter, sweetie, and now I kind of have one, provided you'd like to stay with us. Himiko nodded very slowly. I think I'd like that, the girl admitted whilst hugging herself. Inko smiled at her from the rearview mirror as they pulled into a large shopping center. I know that I would love that, she smiled as she parked the car. Now then, Mitsuki, where's this should-be famous clothing store of yours? Mitsuki grinned at her widely. Oh, honey, wait, till I show you what I've got. 20 minutes later, when Himiko thought about buying more clothes, the last thing she expected was to be thrust into a shop that sold dizzyingly expensive dresses made of satin, silk and some of the softest cotton she'd ever felt. They were all very pretty, that much she would readily admit, but there was just one problem. You don't like any of them. Mitsuki's face fell as if someone had just told her that her store was closing. The clerk was no better. Even though she had tried to pick out dresses that matched her skin well, nothing really stuck with her. Himiko felt bad for disappointing her. It's not that I don't like them, she mumbled as she looked at herself in an extra satiny red dress with spaghetti shoulder straps. I don't see myself wearing this just to go to the park, or hang out with. Inko was giggling. She's right, Mitsuki, all you've been showing her are clothes she'd need for a fancy night out on the town. Her friend gave the woman a light glare. Honestly, sweetie, some of these dresses look ready to fall off of her. That's sort of the idea, in some regards, mumbled the fashionista, her arms crossed under her chest. You're right, Inko, oh, don't act so smug. She snapped half-heartedly as the woman just grinned at her. Once you've lost some weight, we will be back here for you. Are you kidding? She asked as she looked at a dress that used to be her size. If I put one of these on, my bodies would fall out. Himiko snickered at that mental image while Mitsuki coughed to hide a blush. No offense, dearie, but don't you have any everyday clothing? She asked the store clerk. But of course, ma'am, just follow me. She led them toward the middle of the sizable store where Himiko's face lit up with delight. Inko giggled. Now this is more like it, thank you, dearie. She laughed as Himiko took off through the rows of jeans, sweaters, shirts and shoes. Mitsuki just pouted. A girl with her looks needs at least a couple of dresses. Inko showed her some of the clothes the girl had tried on before. I at least kept the black and red cocktail dresses, she reminded her with a small giggle. I admit, she looks lovely in those colors. That did make her friend feel better as Himiko bounced back to the three of them with an absolute armload. Wait a minute. How am I gonna pay for all of this? She asked in a near panic. She liked her kind of mother, Inko and Mitsuki, a lot at this point, but she was still skittish. Part of her hoped that this wasn't some form of joke. Mitsuki just looked at her. Honey, I thought you knew. She gestured to the clerk. I own this store, so you can just take whatever you want. She grinned at the girl and gave her a small wink. But just for today, all right. Himiko blinked at her. But that's stealing. Papa said stealing was. Papa Schmappa. Mitsuki grinned at her. This is me giving you a gift, sweetie, a gift that you more than deserve after what you've been through, so consider this. She thought for a moment, a really big birthday gift. She grinned as she reached out and took the clothes from her before she handed them to the clerk. Go ahead and bag these up, Machiko, she'll need shoes, too. Yes, ma'am, the woman laughed, and don't worry, young lady. This store's sales are pretty high, considering the only competition we've had has been from the stores owned by Uebami. She giggled as she headed for the front desk. Just bring anything else you find up to my desk, okay? Mitsuki and Inko smiled indulgently as the young girl was once again close to tears. Ever worn heels before, sweetie? Mitsuki asked while Inko just groaned. Just no stilettos, please, the portly woman begged. Those things are absolute death traps in disguise. Mitsuki ended up convincing Himiko to try on a pair of the high-heeled shoes, and the poor girl instantly regretted agreeing when she tried to keep her balance. I don't think these are my kinda. Whoa. When she had tried to stand up in the shoes, she found that the tiptoe way it held her feet up was exceptionally uncomfortable, not to mention the sudden increase in height gave her a dizzying head rush. Had it not been for Inko standing next to the girl, she would have toppled over and fallen flat on her face. Yeah, I don't think these are my thing, she said with no small amount of embarrassment. I didn't think so. Inko giggled as she set the girl back on her feet, and helped her sit back down to take the shoes off. If you want her in heels, then at least give her something lower, like ballroom heels, or even a ballerina flat, she said to her friend, who agreed with her rather quickly after seeing the girl's near mishap. A few minutes later, Himiko was carrying 4 different boxes. Isn't this a little much?" she asked. "Really, a pair of sneakers would have been fine." Mitsuki looked at her like she'd grown a second head. "Now, that right there is ridiculous. I bet your mother owned at least this many pairs of shoes." No," Himiko mumbled. "Papa never liked her spending too much money of things he thought we didn't need." Mitsuki's eye began twitching quite manically. "Your father is a schmuck." Himiko had to bite her lip to keep from laughing at her while she turned around and headed for the front desk. Miss Midoriya." Inko turned toward her. "I don't mean to pry, but—" "What is it, dear?" Inko asked. Himiko blushed. I was just wondering. I mean, I noticed her blushing around you a lot, and—" Inko still looked a little confused. "Are you and Mrs. Bakugo dating?" Inko's brow shot into her hair. "No. Whatever gave you that idea?" she asked, genuinely surprised. "We have been friends since we were children, but we both got married and had our sons. Besides, I just went through a divorce, and Mitsuki has a very nice husband." "Oh," the girl said, nodding. "I'm sorry, then. I just noticed that she was blushing a lot." Inko giggled. "Oh, she's probably just embarrassed that she picked the wrong clothes for you, sweetie," she said with a giggle in her friend's direction, "and I'm willing to bet that she's pretty happy today as well. We haven't really had a chance to spend time together like this in a long time. I just started having dinner with her and Masaru again not that long ago, so she was probably excited that I asked her along on this little trip." Himiko nodded again, though she still wasn't so sure. When they reached the front desk, it was to find Mitsuki and Michiko talking animatedly with a very unique young lady. Inko thought it made her all the much more lovely in her opinion. She was a girl with pink everything, really. At least from what she could tell. She was just a little bit taller than Himiko was, with fluffy pink hair, and a lighter shade of pink skin. "I'm sorry, dearie, I didn't know we were keeping you from your regular customers." Inko smiled at the girl, who turned to her revealing the most beautiful set of eyes that the woman had ever seen. "Oh, my, what a lovely girl," she thought as she saw the girl's golden irises surrounded by an unusual but beautiful black sclerae. Michiko shook her head. "Think nothing of it," she smiled, gesturing to the girl. "Miss Ashido here is actually quite the frequent customer." The girl beamed at her. "You better believe I am. This place sells some of the best clothes, and I can actually afford them, not like Uwabami's place." "Yes," Mitsuki suddenly crowed, "thank you. That puffed-up woman never sells anything low enough for us commoners to wear." Inko giggled. "You're a former fashion model, Mitsuki, so I'd hardly call you a commoner," she laughed as Himiko placed her shoes on the desk. "Speaking of modeling, this young lady looks like she could be an up-and-coming talent." The girl just blushed a lovely shade of lavender. "Aw, shucks, I don't think I'm model material," she gestured to herself. "Pink skin isn't exactly all the rage these days." Mitsuki gave the girl a calculating eye. I wouldn't sell yourself short so quickly, young lady," she smiled while the girl blinked at her. "Your skin is a lovely shade that would go quite well with most any color dress you wear, and you have quite the nice figure for someone as young as you are." "Mitsuki," Inko admonished her with a slap on the arm. "That's not what I mean, and you know it." The woman grinned at her. "What I mean is that she has a healthy body, not like some girls who think a French fry equals an extra 20 pounds they have to barf up later." Inko nodded, noticing that Himiko was standing slightly behind her, as if almost afraid of being near the girl. The woman smiled, reaching round to hold the girl's hand comfortingly. "Yeah, I like my fries," Ashido giggled with a little embarrassment, "maybe a little too much," she admitted while bringing her hands up and touching her fingers together, "but thanks for the compliments. I always love it when someone appreciates my pinkness. But I'm also trying out for UA in February, so modeling is kind of a no-go for me." "Sorry." "Well, what a coincidence," Inko said in delight. "Our sons are trying out for UA, too." Mitsuki sighed in exasperation, against my better judgment after I found out what that little hooligan of mine's been up to. She said, leaning over toward the girl, do me a favor, if you run across a kid with the name Bakugo, give him a good ass kicking for me, K. Ashido started giggling again. I'll keep that in mind, she said before taking a small bag from the desk and skipping toward the exit. Well, it was nice meeting you guys. Hope I get to meet your boys in school. Inko was already imagining how the girl would look next to her son. Mitsuki saw this and flicked her on the forehead, no matchmaking until school starts. Mina Ashido had just had the coolest time after meeting the owner of her favorite clothing store. Not only was the woman nice, but she liked the way she looked and thought she had what it took to be a model. She was squealing with joy both inside and outside as she practically danced along the street. She was barely paying attention to anyone else in her excitement as she pranced along. That was until a large shadow loomed over her. Excuse me, the voice was low, yet loud enough to rattle her down to her core. She hadn't even seen who was speaking to her and she was already breaking out in a cold sweat. I'm looking for the Springer Hero Agency. She turned her head very slowly to look up at the giant that was glaring down at her. Could you tell me where it is? He was 20 feet tall, easily, and had his face and body mostly covered in an overly large tarp, but his glowing white eyes and his tusks were very visible to her when she looked high enough. She froze, her body trembling violently. When she didn't answer, the giant stretched out his arm from beneath the tarp, easily as thick as a tree, and dug his fingers into the building behind her, concrete falling away as he gauged it out. Did you not hear me? I would like to know where the Springer Hero Agency is. When the debris he had created fell next to her, she fell on her butt, terrified. Just tell him, she screamed at herself, he'll go away if you just tell him where to go. She tried to talk, but it just came out as a small sound. Why can't I speak? He sounded like he was getting angry. You're being very rude. Why won't you answer? She wanted to. She really did, but she couldn't. There was nothing that could snap her out of the fear-induced stupor she'd been caught in. Not the sounds of horns honking. Not the faint green flash of light she saw out of the corner of her eyes. All she could think was that she was going to die if this behemoth didn't get his answers. Suddenly, a large, red blur appeared in front of her. If you're looking for the Springer Hero Agency, then you need to go down this road, the large muscular red man said, pointing down the road with his left arms. He had 4 of them. Take a left at the next 4-way intersection, and you should see it right in front of you. It's a really gaudy building that's nearly impossible to miss. Number 4 arms. This muscular behemoth's name speaks for itself. He's got enhanced strength and durability that put him near the same level as All Might in terms of power. His tough and thorny hide make him bulletproof, blade-proof, and even fireproof. But thanks to his large muscle structure, he's not the fastest alien around. Thank you very much. The giant withdrew his hand and started on his way. The red man stood in front of her until he was certain that the monster was not coming back before he turned to her, and touched an hourglass-like symbol on his chest. In a brief flash of green that made her cover her eyes, the red 4-armed man was gone, and replaced by a boy not much older, maybe even a little younger than herself. He knelt down in front of her and offered her his hand. Are you all right? He asked with concern lacing through his voice. He didn't hurt you, did he? His tone was so gentle and comforting to her in that moment that she immediately snapped out of her stupor, and broke down. Wah, that was so scary. Across the street, a certain blonde man was close to having a heart attack as she phoned the police. I'm telling you guys, this was Gigantomachia. He's heading for the Springer Hero Agency. Get someone over there to warn them right away. And get ready for some real damage. He said and looked back toward the boy as he was freaking out over the crying girl. Just hug her already. He grumbled just as he saw Inko, Mitsuki and Himiko running toward them. Boy, that's not gonna look good. Gigantomachia was a well-known entity of destructive power. Not only was he, supposedly, naturally large in stature, but his quirk allowed him to grow in size to over 50 meters, mutating his body into a nigh unstoppable tank. During his battle with his nemesis, All Might suspected that the monster was a product of his experiments to house multiple compatible quirks in a single body. Because this person could no longer be called as such, Gigantomachia was a monster, without question. Seeing Izuku rushing toward the behemoth had nearly given Toshinori a heart attack, especially when he saw him change into the four-armed giant that was his equal in strength as All Might. Thank heaven the boy only intervened to misdirect the monster's attention from the frightened girl that he was obviously about to harm had he not answered his question for him. Things only escalated from there, however, as the boy's mother, aunt, and current foster sister arrived to find him standing over a very distraught girl. As much as the man thought that the boy deserved just a little misery for scaring him so badly, he stepped in and explained the situation. Shortly afterward the real circus began as the police arrived, as well as a mob of reporters. Again, Toshinori was thankful that he had some contacts within the police stations to keep the crowd back. Knowing that Gigantomachia was in the area was a huge scoop, and the two children were the prime targets for the media. After I answered him, he just seemed to lose interest in us, and went on his way, Izuku explained to one of the officers as he took the boy's statement. Another was standing by the girl taking her own statement over the situation. She had calmed down considerably after the two older women had arrived on the scene. "You're extremely lucky that he did," Toshinori put in. "Gigantomachia is dangerously unpredictable, and if he'd been in a foul mood, you could have been added to his extensive list of victims." Izuku blushed but gave the man a challenging look. "Well, I couldn't just stand by and do nothing," he pointed out as the girl looked over at him. "There's no telling what would have happened. Yeah, but if I didn't at least try to answer him, the girl definitely would have gotten hurt." "I'm not angry that you saved the girl, kid," Toshinori shook his head. "I'm angry because you just took off without even telling me." Izuku blinked just as the man reached out and hugged the boy. "Your drive to be a hero is incredible, Izuku, but you have to think about situations like this. You didn't even think to let me in on what you were doing." He pulled back and gave the boy a look. "And if you'd been hurt because I could have acted but didn't, I'd never forgive myself." Mina saw this and moved away from the officer questioning her. Sir." The skeletal man turned to her. "Oh, I'm sorry, miss, we didn't mean to ignore." "Please, don't be too mad at him," the girl suddenly pleaded. "If I hadn't froze up the way I did, then that guy wouldn't have started getting angry, and your son wouldn't have gotten involved." "Son." Both of them blinked, looking at each other. Toshinori smiled at them both. "It's not something you should feel sorry for, young lady," the man said. "This boy's got the heart of a true hero, always rushing in before he can think things through." He smiled at the girl as she worried her lip. "And you shouldn't feel bad about freezing up in front of Gigantomachia of all people. Even All Might thinks that guy is a monster." And well, he's not my dad, but," Izuku stammered out, his face slightly flustered due to the fact that the girl's attention was mostly on him, and the fact that Toshinori was chuckling softly at his predicament. Oh, she blushed, to Izuku's surprise, a very pretty shade of lavender. The sight of such a unique color on her cheeks made the boy himself blush even harder. "I'm sorry, you guys seemed pretty close, so I thought." Toshinori laughed as the boy's mother came over. "Believe me, I wish he was my son." Saying this made Inko gain a very pretty shade pink on her cheeks as well. "At least then I'd have the right to smack him upside the head for scaring the hell out of me like that." Izuku rubbed the back of his neck. Hee, lucky me, huh?" he said nervously, right before his mother did exactly as Toshinori wanted and slapped the back of his head with a decent amount of force for such a petite woman. "Ow. Mo-oh-ohm." The boy's whine brought a giggle from the pink-skinned girl while Toshinori outright laughed. "Let that be a lesson to you for doing something so reckless, even if you did save this lovely young lady." Inko huffed as she nursed her hand. Her son's head was a bit harder than she'd thought before smacking him. Hearing this, Mitsuki rolled her eyes and conspirationally whispered to Himiko, "She's in matchmaking mode." She grinned as the girl snickered. Mina giggled behind her hand. "Well, I can honestly say that this isn't how I pictured meeting your son when you told me he was aiming for UA. Hi," she said with a small look in his direction, "but I'm glad I did. He's a real hero." Another shade of lavender dusted her cheeks. "Oh, that he is," Inko said proudly as she wrapped him up in a hug. but he really needs to work on all of this running in before he thinks. Well, I sure didn't mind. Mina laughed before she turned back to the police officers. Anyway, I should probably get this done so I can get home. My mom's probably gonna have kittens when she hears about this. She stepped away before glancing back at Izuku. Before that, she skipped back toward him. Could I see your phone for a minute? Izuku blinked in confusion. My phone. Egu. His mother discreetly pinched him from behind. Yeah, sure. He yelped as he dug his phone out of his pocket. Toshinori sidled up to Inko while the boy gave over his phone. Wasn't that a little too crude? He whispered. Inko gave the man a small look out of the corner of her eye. Are you joking? Not only is he shy, but he's clueless when it comes to girls. She whispered back. They just met, he chuckled, to which Inko shrugged. Meanwhile, Mina finished tapping away at his phone and handed it back to him. There, she handed it back to him with a huge smile on her face. Now we have each other's numbers, so, she trailed off a little before Izuku saw that pretty and unique blush rising to her cheeks more prominently. If you're ever free, we can get together and hang out, maybe. Toshinori nearly coughed up blood at how hard his laughter became when the boy went neon red all the way up to his hair. Inko just let out an exasperated sigh while Mitsuki and Himiko let loose with their laughter. Honestly, it was the funniest thing the younger blonde girl had seen in a long time, plus she loved the feeling of openly laughing again. Midoriya. Izuku's blush immediately vanished as a familiar indigo-haired young man rushed through the crowd, dodging a police officer in the process, and grabbed Izuku by the shoulders. I leave you alone for one day, and I get a news update on my phone. He pulled the boy nose to nose with him. Wanna know what it said? Chance of rain on Tuesday. Izuku stammered out nervously. It said a certain green-haired hero wannabe nearly tangled with one of Japan's most wanted criminals. Hitoshi started shaking him violently. Is this a thing with you, or are you just completely out of your mind? Really, Shinso, I didn't plan for this to happen. Izuku shouted out while trying not to bite his tongue. It just kinda did. You call that an excuse? Shinso yelled. I'm glad we're friends, but come on. You're a magnet for trouble. Will you stop shaking me? Izuku pleaded. I'm getting dizzy. Big deal, Shinso shouted. I swear to God, if I get into trouble because of you, I'm brainwashing you into wearing a green tutu. The remaining tension was completely broke by the brainwashing teen's arrival, and the situation quickly dissolved, leaving the small group to part ways with Mina, who was driven home by one of Toshinori's friends on the force, while the blonde man helped load up all of Himiko's new clothes into his truck since Izuku's car didn't have the space to hold all of the bags. While the ladies drove the DX Mark 10 back home, Shinso rode with Toshinori and Izuku in the truck. I can't believe you, Hitoshi groaned. Can't you stay out of trouble for even 5 seconds? Well, I try, don't I? Izuku chuckled nervously, still dizzy from being shaken. Besides, it's not like I expected to meet the most dangerous villain in the world. Hitoshi scoffed. And you totally didn't do it because there was a smokin' hot girl involved. He said, much to Izuku's embarrassment. At least tell me you got her number. Izuku blinked and showed him his phone. Well, yeah, she. He started blushing again. Toshinori gave him a side glance. What's wrong, kid? I totally have a girl's number in my phone. Izuku yelled happily, prompting Toshinori to swerve while Hitoshi yelled, Are you kidding me? Toshinori sighed as he patted his chest, calming his heart a little. Young Midoriya, you are going to give me either a heart attack or an apoplexy, the man said with the brainwasher nodding along in agreement. Besides, don't you have young Hatsume's number in there? Izuku's face lit up again. I have 2 girls' numbers in my phone. He looked ready to cry from pure joy before Hitoshi groaned. How did your exams go? Hitoshi asked, hoping to get off the subject of girls in general. Did you pass? Izuku's testing had gone as well as it could have gone after they left the school, as Toshinori had driven him home and he had taken the test online. It was even simpler than he had imagined it. The boy would have no trouble at all graduating. Hitoshi was confident in his own academics, knowing that his school's assignments were rather lax. While on the way home, Izuku got a call from Hatsume stating that she was on her way over to celebrate the end of their middle school lives, not even bothering to say that she had passed her exams. That night, the Midoriya household was once again full of noise as Izuku and Mei helped Himiko with her exam and, after making sure that she had passed, Izuku practically gave her the answers by transforming into a little gray frog-like creature with huge eyes. "How many forms do you have?" Himiko had asked. Afterward, Toshinori had ordered pizza for the evening, and was treated to the sight of some very happy teens devouring 2 or 3 of them. "Enjoy it while you can," Toshinori said to Izuku as he munched on a slice, "because tomorrow is when we put in more combat training." Hitoshi looked at the man. "Hey, do you think I could tag along?" he asked. "I know I can use the support item Midoriya gave me, but it wouldn't hurt to learn how to handle myself in a fight." Toshinori nodded. "I don't mind a bit, young Shinso," he chuckled. "It'd give young Midoriya a good opportunity to fight someone he doesn't have to worry about hurting." Mei giggled. "Pretty sure a punch from Mr. Muscles here would hurt Shinso just as much as it would you." Toshinori shook his head. "What I mean is that young Midoriya takes care not to hit me full force when we spar because of my injury," he said with a hint of gratitude in his voice, "which I am grateful for, but he needs to go for an opponent's weak point, or else he may never gain the upper hand in a fight." He gestured to the taller boy. "With Shinso in the mix, he won't have to worry about any serious damage aside from some bruising and maybe a split lip or 2. Hitoshi just grinned. "I think I can handle that." Inko worried. "However, just don't push them too hard, alright?" she asked. "Oh, and Izuku. I was thinking about moving close to the school. Would that be alright? You know I don't mind, but," he frowned, "if I get in, I'll be staying at the dorms." "You really don't have to." Toshinori nodded in understanding. "He's right, Inko, but I can understand wanting to be closer to your son, and your therapist." "That would be nice," Inko said. "I think you should enjoy yourself," Mitsuki said from the kitchen. "Lord only knows how much you deserve it after dealing with all of the crap in your life." She came into the living room with another box of pizza. "Go out, have fun, hell have a few drinks just because you can." She gave a small glance towards Toshinori while setting the box on the table, "and maybe find a new man." "PFF'd," sputtered the blonde while Inko blushed crimson. Izuku chuckled at his mentor. "You know, Mom, she's right," he said, much to his mother's embarrassment. "You do need to go out more, and maybe have a little fun. And get back in shape," Mitsuki added in, leaning over to poke at Inko's stomach. "You used to be able to fit into a size 4 dress." Inko swatted her hand away with a frown. "Mitsuki, there's no way I can drop a full 3 sizes." "Never say never, my dear," Toshinori said. "Look at Izuku, for example. He used to be pretty scrawny until I got a hold of him." Inko worried her lip. "Well, hey, Ms. Midoriya," Himiko suddenly called out, "I think we made a little mistake with my clothes." Both Inko and Mitsuki turned to see the girl poking her head out of her room. "What do you mean, dear?" Mitsuki asked. "I'm pretty sure we got everything you wanted." Himiko was blushing heavily as she shyly stepped out from behind the door. Inko nearly teared up while Mitsuki just cooed happily. "Ooh, sweetheart, you look amazing." The ashen blonde smiled at her. "Red is definitely your color, dear," Inko agreed with her friend. Himiko had come out wearing the same red satin dress she had tried on at the clothing store. She had thought that it had been a mistake to find it in her bags, but when she tried it on, it seemed to fit better than before. She looked over toward her friends and saw that both boys had faint blushes on their faces while Mei was. Why was she staring at her legs? "Huh, maybe I am attracted to girls," Mei muttered aloud. Hitoshi whipped his head around to the girl, while Izuku just chuckled. "That would explain a few things, but not why you don't seem to care who sees you naked, Hatsume," Izuku said nervously while Himiko had a sudden desire to hide her legs from the mechanic's view. Inko just sighed in defeat while Mitsuki comforted her. "Well, that's one off the hopeful list." "I know, Inko, I know," said Mitsuki while she patted her shoulder, "but just think about it. Izuku's going to pass the UA exams, and be surrounded by incredibly beautiful young women. And one of them could make him a very nice wife." Izuku looked mortified. "Auntie, You really think so, Mistuki? Inko asked, completely ignoring her son's outraged cry and the laughter that was erupting from the other guests. Mitsuki nodded dramatically. I know so, Inko, because he's such a darling young man, not like my delinquent of a son that thinks women are a waste of time. She wiped a fake tear from her eye. At this rate, I'll be dead before that little idiot knocks a girl up. Oh, there, Mitsuki, it'll be all right, Inko said, at least your son notices when girls show interest in him. Not like my son, he practically has to be hit in the face with it. Will you please stop? Izuku pleaded. Mitsuki just nodded in understanding, barely containing her laughter. You do have a point there, Inko. She said to the now tittering woman. That lovely girl, Ashido, was practically drooling over him, but he didn't even notice until she asked for his phone. Even then he didn't think she was interested. Izuku wanted to crawl into a hole at this point as Shinso and Mei were bawling with laughter. Himiko was holding onto the wall with one arm, while the other was holding her stomach as she laughed. Toshinori had already spit up a mouthful of blood from laughing too hard. Seriously, just stop, please. That did it. Both Inko and Mitsuki burst out laughing at the boy. I hate you guys so much right now. He moaned as the laughter continued. And what do you mean Miss Ashido was drooling? She didn't look that interested to me. Toshinori chuckled while wiping his lips with a napkin. Maybe not romantically, kid, but she definitely wanted to get to know you more. He chuckled. Not to stereotype, but it's been my experience in the hero business that women tend to fawn over their saviors. Some of us do, Mitsuki admitted, but not all. Ashido seems like a strong young woman, and not one to fangirl over someone that saves her. She laughed, but then again, she sure was making goo-goo eyes at Izuku. She was not, the boy grumbled. What girl would be interested in me anyway? He wondered to himself. I mean, Ashido was gorgeous. Her eyes alone could captivate anyone. So you liked her eyes, too? Inko giggled, snapping Izuku out of his thoughts. Izuku looked at the adults, and his snickering friends. I said that out loud, didn't I? Himiko came and sat down in the remaining armchair. Hey, I'll readily admit that I thought she was hot, the girl said as she snagged a slice of pizza for herself, careful of her new dress. But I thought she had great legs. Nice boobs, too, Shinso said, grinning when Izuku elbowed him. What? You know you looked, too. Oh, come on, you've touched mine more than once, Mei giggled at the boy's reddening face, and you've seen them, so how come you're still shy about it? You have absolutely no shame. Izuku shouted. Ah, you love that about me and you know it. Mei countered with a huge grin on her face as she leaned on him. Izuku wanted to argue, but stopped, dropping his head. Yeah, I do, damn it. The room was full of laughter again at the boy's expense. Ashido household, I can't believe you had to go through something so frightening, Mina, the girl's mother said as she and her daughter stood at the sink washing dishes. Honestly, you would think that with All Might prowling around this area of Japan, villains would be laying low. She sighed while scrubbing furiously, but oh no, there's nothing but hooligans, ruffians and monsters running amok on the streets. Mina giggled at her mother's dramatics. Mom, chill out, I came out of it okay, she said with a small smile. Honestly, if I hadn't froze up when I did, I'd have been better off. The guy was just asking a question, and I couldn't even answer him. Her mother rolled her eyes. That's hardly the point, darling, she muttered. If that young man you told me about hadn't stepped in, you could have been seriously hurt. And where were the so-called heroes? Nowhere to be seen. She's right, Mina, her father called from the living room. Unless we're talking about the top 10 tiers, then most of your heroes nowadays aren't worth the paper their licenses are printed on. He said, and I saw the news earlier. That Springer Hero Agency, it was totaled. Apparently that Giganto what's his name tore the place apart, and he's still on the loose. Mina shivered. Good thing I got away then, she said brightly. Mina, her mother looked at her in concern. Are you sure you want to try out for the hero course? She asked, seeing her daughter giving her a worried look. You know we wouldn't mind if you just went in for general studies. Mina shook her head. Relax, Mom, you know I've wanted this since I was a kid. She looked down at her soap-covered hands. Besides, with looks like mine I can't say I do well in the business world. Her mother looked at her with a small amount in her eyes. Mina Ishido, that is the last thing I want to hear from you. She turned to her with her hands on her hips. You are, no matter what anyone says, a beautiful, sweet, and all-around wonderful girl. And I couldn't be prouder of how you look. Mina smiled at her. Her parents were the only people she could admit her insecurities to about her looks. Sure, racism had gone flying out the window when quirks started appearing along with heroes, but having a truly unique skin color like hers made her stand out more than if she walked down the street naked. There were plenty of full-on mutants that looked pretty wild like Gang Orca and Centipeder, but there were few that had skin like hers. That was why Bubble Girl was one of her favorite heroes. She had blue skin, just like Mina had pink skin. Her mother looked similar to her. Her eyes were the same black and gold color, and her skin was a much lighter shade of pink than hers, so much so that it was barely noticeable. Her horns came from her father. The man was large, beefy, and as gentle as a lamb. But he had two small horns on his forehead that looked like little devil horns. Nothing special about either of them save for the fact that her mother could create weak acids from her fingertips. That goes without saying, her father said, though, you could have gotten my horns in a better way, my little Martian. He joked, making her laugh with him as her mother huffed. It was a little inside joke with them since Mina's crooked little horns looked like antennae, something one would see on some cheesy pre-21st century alien movie. Her dad joked about his daughter being part alien all the time, and she rolled with it like a bowling ball. What about this young man that saved you? Her mother asked. Didn't you say he had a mutation-type quirk that turned his skin bright red, and gave him forearms and eyes? Mina shrugged. Yeah, it was nuts to see someone like that, she said, her head drooping a little, but he turned back to his original self pretty easy, so I'm guessing his quirk only mutates him when he activates it. She sighed a little, but I kinda liked his normal form better, she admitted while her mother looked at her knowingly. He was cute, her mother supplied. Adorable, Mina immediately blurted out. He had this cute little mop of greenish-black hair that looked fluffier than mine is after a good shower. She giggled as she pointed to her cheeks, and he had these freckles on his cheeks that made cute little diamonds on his face and, he had the greenest eyes I'd ever seen on anyone. I even met his mother, and they were nowhere near as green as his were. And why are you guys laughing? Her mother held a hand to her lips with a little titter going on while her father was snickering away from the couch. Come on, guys, what's so funny? Mina asked with a smile on her face while her mother calmed down. She coughed into her fist to keep her giggles at bay. Ahem, Mina, are you sure you're not crushing on this boy? She asked while her daughter's eyes went as wide as saucers. Oops, looks like I hit the nail on the head. Mina shook her head. Mom, no way. She crossed her arms in an X shape. I'm not the kinda girl to go falling for the first cute face that pulls the old prince on a white horse spiel. That's not how it sounds to me, her father chuckled. I wanna meet this kid. I at least need to thank him for saving my daughter. Mina just crossed her arms with a look in his direction. Why? So you can pull your whole intimidation act on him? She asked as the man shrugged. She moved into the living room and leaned over his shoulder. Daddy, come on. The poor guy looked really timid after his quirk deactivated. Like, he went nuclear red when I said that I put my number in his phone. Oh, the innocent type. Her mother giggled. That's just the kind of boy you like the most, isn't it? Mina just rolled her eyes. Come on, I mean it. She sighed. Besides, she frowned. Her father looked over his shoulder at her. Besides what, honey? Guys, let's be real. Look at me. She looked down at her arms. Whatcha wanna bet that I'm the only girl in UA that has skin like this? Her father stood up, turned around and placed his massive hands on her shoulders. Now you listen to me, Mina. If that boy, or any other boy or girl has issues with your skin color, then they are not worth even mentioning, or remembering for that matter. Like your mother said, you're a perfectly beautiful young lady, and anyone should be happy if you gave them the time of day. Mina got kind of teary-eyed for a moment, but she wiped it away quickly. The owner of the clothing store I like said I could be a model, the girl muttered, and she used to be one, so. See, her father tried not to sound smug, but he failed miserably. we're not the only ones that think you're a beauty." Mina giggled before she hopped across the back of the couch and hugged him. "Thanks, Dad." True to Toshinori's word, both Izuku and Hitoshi were plunged headfirst into combat training while also working on Hitoshi's frail form. Every day for the remaining days of January the three of them were either at the man's personal gym practicing forms of mixed martial arts and muscle strengthening. Izuku would come home tired, but not exhausted. Toshinori knew better now than to push the boy too far. Meanwhile, taking Mitsuki's advice, Inko herself hit the gym with her friend and foster daughter in tow. More than once, Himiko worried that the woman was going to kill herself with how hard she had started to work, but her friend was with her through it all. By the end of the month, she was looking rather healthy, while both Izuku and Hitoshi looked. Himiko had to remind herself that one of them was actually her foster brother for the time being. Mei worked on several inventions that would get her into the support course rather easily, and Hitoshi no longer looked like a twig. Like Izuku, his arms had bulked up considerably, only with Izuku the verdette's frame seemed to be more lean than his violet-haired friend's. He was no less strong, however, as during their training Izuku had proven to have a very mean left hook. Finally, in the middle of February, the time of the entrance exams for UA arrived. Toshinori escorted the trio to the gates of UA, a proud smile on his face. "You've all done wonderfully up to this point," he said to the children. "I couldn't be prouder of any of you, though I feel like I should have been able to do something more for you, young Hatsume." The crosshair-eyed girl just gave him a grin. "Ah, don't worry about it," she said dismissively. "If it wasn't for you, I probably never would have met Izuku, anyway, so thanks for that." The man just chuckled before turning to the two boys, both of them with prototools mounted on their shoulders. "You two look like pros already," he said while the boys just smiled. "Just remember, use your heads, use your training and you won't fail." "Yes, sir." Hitoshi gave a short bow. "Thanks for everything." Izuku nodded. "Yeah, thank you for taking a chance on us." Toshinori just shook his head. "I meant what I said, young Midoriya, and now I can extend that same sentiment to you, young Shinso." He smiled at the boys. "You will be heroes. Great heroes." He smiled teasingly. "Greater than All Might ever was at this age." Hitoshi just chuckled. "Now that's going too far, Mr. Yagi," he said, choking up a little at the man's kind words while Izuku was slightly tearing up, knowing that the man really meant what he said. Meanwhile, Himiko and Inko were going through something similar, nervous. The woman asked of the blonde girl. "A little," she admitted. "Are you sure you don't want me in the hero course? Are you sure you don't want to go to the hero course?" Inko countered with a slight smile. "I don't mind that you want to go in for general studies, dear, not at all." She shook her head before she reached over and took the girl's hand and gave it a comforting squeeze. "But this is the start of your life, sweetheart, not mine. If the general studies course is what you want for yourself, then that is what you need to take," she said, casting a glance over her shoulder at the trio speaking with Toshinori. "Just like Izuku wants to be a hero, if you want a normal life, then that's fine. I can't and won't force something you don't want on your shoulders." Himiko gave her a little smile. "You know, I wish you were my real mom," she said before hugging the woman. "I think I wanna try out for Move It Deku." Both of them jumped as they heard the loudest voice either of them had ever heard. Inko had a frown on her face as she turned and saw her best friend's son stalking forward. Of course he had plenty of room to move around the group, but he seemed intent on plowing right through her son and his little group. "I am not letting him get away with that today of all days," she grumbled and bustled forward, purse brandished like a weapon. "Dude, seriously, take the stick out of your ass and go around us," she heard Shinso groan as the blonde boy turned his snarl on him. "We weren't even bothering you and you just come up here like you own the place." Toshinori looked like he was ready to intervene since the boy didn't seem to remember him in the slightest. A good threat now would probably curb that attitude of his. But the blonde had already started gearing up to snap at Shinso when the boy was suddenly lifted from the ground and pulled away from the group. What the hell? He was brought face to face with a very, very angry Auntie Inko. "You say one more word, young man, and me and your mother will have a very long talk about your rude, violent and disrespectful behavior." she said evenly calm. She then set him back on his feet with her quirk. There now, there's no one in your way, not that there was before, so be on your way. She made a shoo-shoo motion with her hand. Go on. Scat. Katsuki glared at her, looking behind her for a moment and saw the nerd reaching for something on his wrist. He was finally ready to fight if the blonde said anything to his mother. But the boy wasn't stupid. His mother made it no secret that if something happened to her friend on his account, then there would be hell to pay. Plus, he wouldn't go against his own mother, anyway. He turned around, and came face to face with another bug. But this bug decided to sting him. Smack. Quick as a whip, Himiko Toga slapped the blonde clean across the face. Dazed, confused and now growing even angrier, the boy snarled at her. But not before the girl flashed some very sharp-looking fangs at him while looking at him with the coldest eyes he'd ever seen. Don't even think about hurting my mom, or my brother. She brushed past him. See you in the hero course, asshole. Katsuki walked away without another word, his cheeks glowing red. But not because he was angry. How? Where the body did? Who the body? His thoughts were all in a jumble as he staggered toward the school. Meanwhile, Himiko was nursing her stinging hand. Geez. I didn't think I hit him that hard. She whimpered as she waved her hand to dull the pain while Mei and Hitoshi were cracking up. Come on, guys, it's not that funny. It's hilarious. Mei guffawed, her arms wrapped around her stomach. Oh, God, did you see his face? Priceless. Hitoshi held out his fist to the girl, who tentatively bumped knuckles with him. Nice work. The boy grinned at her. Maybe he'll think twice before trying to mess with us again. Izuku, however, was freaking out. I can't believe you did that. He stammered. I can't believe you got away with it. He's blasted people for way less. Sorry, Himiko mumbled. I just didn't like the way he was snapping at you guys like that. She shrugged. Reminded me of what my dad used to do to me. Toshinori chuckled. I think you did wonderfully, young Toga. He smirked at her. Might be the reality check he needs. If not, then this school is gonna eat him alive. He then started moving them toward the school. Now go on, off with the lot of you. The exams should be starting soon. And Himiko, dear, Inko said, causing the girl to hang back. Inko then took the girl's face between her hands and kissed the top of her forehead. Good luck in there, Miss Hero. Himiko beamed at her before following after her friends as Mei and Hitoshi slung their arms over hers and Izuku's shoulders. Inko smiled fondly as she watched the group enter the building. I never thought I'd see the day my son could smile like that, she said as she watched the smile on her son's face, and it's all because of that little gadget on his wrist. Not so, Toshinori said, that boy has a natural ability to attract others to him. He told the woman, he would have been surrounded by these people even if he didn't have the Ultimatrix. He said, thinking of what could have been if he had passed his quirk onto the boy. He could easily see a great hero rise through the ranks if he had offered the boy his quirk, but he also saw the dangers it could pose. He had come to care for the boy as more than just a student. The girl, Ashido, had mistaken him for his son, and he made no move to correct her. I do think of him like he's my own at times, he thought with a smile, his eyes slanting toward Inko as she dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. If only I could. His phone started buzzing in his jacket pocket. Where are you? It was Principal Nezu. You're going to be late for the main event. Oh, dear, the man mumbled before turning to the woman. I'm sorry to leave you, my dear, but it seems that I'm needed inside the school. Inko nodded. All right, she smiled. I have something to attend to with Mitsuki, too. But please, do keep an eye on things. Toshinori nodded. Of course, he smiled. We could meet up afterward for. Only if the children are allowed to come along. Inko said rather quickly. She felt bad because the man seemed hurt for a moment, but even after all of the time spent with the man, she still wasn't ready to see him as a romantic interest. I was going to suggest taking the kids out for burgers, actually. Toshinori rubbed the back of his neck, his cheeks flushed. Oh, she almost sounded disappointed. The fact of the matter was that she was rather disappointed that he wasn't asking just her out. But she could understand wanting to treat the children after the day they were about to have. Before either could respond, his phone buzzed again. Oy vey, I'd better get going, he muttered, looking back to her. Good luck with whatever you and Mrs. Bakugo are up to. Thank you, the woman said, flustered as well. The man wandered off slowly, leaving Inko feeling. She didn't really know. Shaking her head, she turned to leave. I have to get a handle on this, she thought to herself. He's a nice man, and it's obvious that he wants something more than our friendship. She sighed, not really paying attention to where she was going. My therapy sessions have been going so well, but she was jolted out of her thoughts as a small body came into contact with her. Oof. Ow. The person she had bumped into yelped. Inko blinked in shock. Oh, I'm so very sorry. Oh, Miss Ashido. Inko yelped in alarm as she saw the girl rubbing backside where she had landed. She reached out with her quirk and lifted the poor girl off of the ground. Oh, my dear, I'm so sorry, the woman bemoaned as the girl was set back on her feet. I don't know what's gotten into me today. I can't seem to keep my wits about me. Mrs. Midoriya, Mina asked as she was set back onto her feet. Oh, no, I didn't hurt you, did I? Of course not, dear, she waved off her concerns. I'm the one who should be worrying about hurting you. I'm much bigger, after all. Mina giggled. Nah, I'm pretty sturdy, she said proudly before giving the woman a small smile. You know you look really good. You've trimmed down since I met you. Oh, I wouldn't say that, Inko said with a hint of embarrassment before she checked the time. Oh, dear, you should get going before the testing starts. She said as she ushered the girl along. I wouldn't want you to be late on my account. Oh, right, the girl stammered as she hurried along. Sorry for bumping into you. She called back. Inko just waved as the girl ran into the building. She's such a sweet girl. She sighed as she turned to leave. She had to meet up with Mitsuki for a short workout at their gym. She was quite determined to lose another size or two. The written testing areas for the hero and support courses were different for each course, so Mei had to split from the group early on so that she could meet up with Power Loader. As for Izuku, Hitoshi and Himiko, the trio were all sat in front of Cementos as they took their tests. Izuku caught sight of Katsuki toward the front of the class, but the boy never paid him any attention. Instead his eyes landed on Himiko. For a moment the boy worried that his former friend might try to get some form of payback on the girl he now called his sister before the boy in question turned away with a hint of red on his face. Izuku almost thought he was seeing things. Katsuki Bakugo. Blushing. Impossible. Speaking of blushing, Izuku was doing plenty of that since a certain pink-skinned girl was sitting next to Himiko. Mina hadn't seen him yet, but he suddenly felt a huge amount of guilt, and no small amount of stupidity weighing down his shoulders. He had never called or sent her a text once since he got her number. He shook his head, determined to speak with her after the test was done. Thankfully the written test was relatively easy, even without the use of gray matter, so Izuku was confident in his answers. Hitoshi on the other hand was having a much harder time. Though, as time progressed he seemed to get into a better mindset as his answers began to come more easily. Himiko never stopped smiling and humming while she filled out her test sheet. After about 30 minutes, she raised her hand. Mr. Cementos. Yes, Miss Toga. She held out her test sheet. I'm done with my test, and I'm pretty confident in my work, she told him. Is it all right if I turn it in and head to the next testing site? Cementos smiled at her and accepted the paper. Go right ahead. The hallways are marked so that you won't get lost on your way. He smiled and gave her a thumbs up. Good luck, young lady. Thank you, sir. She got up and gave a little bow to him before waving at Izuku and Hitoshi before leaving. Cementos chuckled and looked at the rest of the class. If there's anyone else that's confident in their work, you may turn in your test sheets and move on to the next area. Unsurprisingly, Bakugo got up to hand in his sheet and left the room. Izuku looked over at Shinso, who gave him a firm nod. Before Izuku got up, a taller teen with dark blue hair and glasses got up to hand in his sheet. Izuku followed closely behind him. Quote? The wordless gasp caught his attention, causing him to turn for the briefest of moments to see Mina looking in his direction. The surprise on her face melted away into a shy, cute smile as she lifted her hand to wave at him. He gave a small shaky smile in return and waved back. Hitoshi caught his eye with a huge cat that got the cream grin on his face. Without another word, the boy turned in his test and walked out into the hall. As the hour wound down, the next area filled up with hopeful students. Hitoshi found Izuku and sat down next to him. "How did you do with the written part?" he asked as Izuku worried his lip. "I know that I passed, but just barely." Izuku nodded. "I did fine, but it's the practical that I'm worried about," he sighed as the students kept filing in. "I know that it's combat-oriented, but I don't know how we're supposed to do it." "Shooting targets." Shinso shrugged before patting his shoulder. "Come on, we'll do fine. Mr. Yagi trained us really well, you especially, and you've got one heck of a punch even without your quirk going for you." Izuku smiled and bumped fists with him. "Thanks, Shinso." "Any time." Hitoshi nodded. "Where's Toga, anyway?" he asked as he looked around for the blonde girl. "I haven't seen her since she left earlier." "Didn't she decide she was gonna take the practical exam for the hero course, too?" That was a good question. Izuku knew that Himiko wasn't the social butterfly that she wanted to be since she normally stayed pretty close to himself or his mother whenever she set foot out of the apartment. She was just now getting used to Hatsume and Shinso being friendly with her. So it was quite a surprise to see the girl in one of the lower rows sitting next to a couple of girls who were chatting with her quite happily. The look on the girl's face seemed to be strained, yet he knew enough to see that she wasn't completely uncomfortable with her situation. He was glad that she seemed to be coming out of her shell and was making a few friends. Not unlike himself. He gulped, however, when he saw another girl take up the seat next to her. It was Ashido again. She seemed to greet the girl in a very friendly manner, that huge ever-present smile on her face. "I wonder," Izuku thought wistfully, "if she'd ever smile at me like that." Hitoshi then nudged him as the last of the students arrived. "Head in the game, Midoriya," he said as one of the teachers stepped up onto the stage. "Things are about to get real." Present Mike was the one to step onto the stage, a massive grin on his face as he spoke out. "Hey, all you listeners, thanks for coming out," he said loudly, even without his quirk activated. "Can I get a yeah?" Shinso clamped his hand over Izuku's mouth before the boy could do exactly what Mike wanted. "Don't do it," he grumbled, only for a petite shout of, "Yeah," to come from below. Both boys looked down to see Himiko standing up with her fist pumping the air. "That's what I'm talking about," Mike shouted happily. "Now all you guys and gals are probably wondering what we're gonna throw at ya for the practical, right?" he asked before continuing on. "Wonder no more, little listeners, because our practical exam consists of a straight-up robo beatdown." The screen behind him lit up and showed 3 shadowy imagines that also appeared on the pamphlets that were sitting in front of the students. As you can see from the screen and the pamphlets in front of you, there are 3 robots that are worth anywhere from 1 to 3 points each. Izuku looked down at his sheet. "Huh," he muttered out loud, "but there's 4 of them, not 3. "Misprint," Shinso suggested. "To pass this exam, you will all have to go up against these robots, and smash, smash, smash your way to victory." Mike went on. "With each robot you break, your chances to be accepted into the hero course goes up. Get enough points, and you're in." "Sir," Hitoshi stood up with his hand raised, "could I ask how many points we need to pass?" His question was met with mutters of agreement from the rest of the students hoping to pass. Mike made a tisk gesture. "Sorry, little listener, but we'll be keeping the exact amount to ourselves," he said, "and the reason for that is so that we as your teachers get to see the best you have to offer, instead of letting you lose your mojo after hitting that point cap. So, even if you think you passed, you'll have to keep on strutting your stuff until time runs out." "Okay, thank you, sir, and sorry for interrupting." Hitoshi sat back down, nervously fiddling with his proto-tool. Izuku chuckled and patted his shoulder. "I have a question," said the blue-haired boy he had noticed earlier. "On the printout you gave us, there appears to be a 4th robot that you've yet to explain. If this is a misprint, then it is a horrible oversight by the faculty." Quote. Whoa, hold on little listener," Mike said, keeping the cheer in his voice. "I was about to explain that. That 4th robot is this school's boss robot. However, this one is worth absolute 0 points. The zero-pointer robot can be a challenge, however, so it's best that it's avoided. Thank for explaining, sir, the teen said before he turned around and pointed an accusing finger, right at Himiko. And you've been snickering this whole time. Himiko yelped and pointed at herself a moment later. It's distracting to the other students. If you're not here to take this test seriously, then you shouldn't be here at all. Himiko looked really uncomfortable, sorry. Her face was beet red with humiliation. Izuku and Shinso's blood boiled. Hey, but it was Mina that stood up to the teen. You leave her alone, mister. Everyone here's nervous enough without a stick in the ass turd monkey like you making it worse. Wah, turd monkey, sputtered the teen. And I'd really appreciate it if you left my sister alone, Izuku spoke up, gaining the teen's attention. She's shy enough as it is. Himiko looked up at him appreciatively while the stiff teen just gaped at them. All right, that's enough with the chest-beating ballyhoo, Mike said to defuse the situation. Moving on, we've taken the liberty of setting up several areas for the practical exam to take place. You should have a designated area listed on your printout. Izuku looked down at his printout. I'm in Area G. I'm B. Hitoshi muttered. They probably wanna keep friends and students from the same schools from helping each other. Izuku nodded to his logic while his friend gave him a look. Good luck out there. Izuku nodded. You, too. Himiko had never been so embarrassed in all of her short 15 years. The practical had started out fine and dandy. She had even managed to chat with a few other girls that were hoping to get into the hero course like she was. But then that loud mouth with the flagpole up his ass had called her out for her nervous giggles. Thank God that Ashido had been there to bail her out of it. And then there was Izuku practically glaring the guy down to leave her alone. It felt like someone had just wrapped her in a warm, fleece blanket. Now she was faced with another dilemma. She, Izuku and Hitoshi had all been sent to separate areas to fight in. This is not good, she mumbled as she hugged herself nervously, looking down at her sharp nails. Okay, there's no need to panic. She told herself, I'm strong. I know that much, and I'm quick so I can move around these things pretty fast. She said before taking a bottle of pills out of her pocket. They were blood tablets that she used for emergencies. While she couldn't use them to transform, they did give her a slight boost in strength like whenever she ingested normal blood. Plus she was feeling hungry. She popped one into her mouth and swallowed quickly so no one would see blood dribbling out of her mouth when it dissolved. Pep pills? Asked a voice from behind her, almost making the poor girl choke. Thankfully the pill was down before that happened as she turned and found Mina standing there. Oh, you're in this area, too? Himiko asked, glad to have a friendly face near her. Mina smiled at her. Yepers, I'm here. She grinned before giving the blonde a concerned look. I know it's none of my business, but are you okay, sweetie? She asked, motioning to the pill bottle. I mean, those aren't, like, you know, drugs. Himiko looked at her. What? Oh, no way, she stammered. These are just for my, well, I guess they're for my stomach. She wasn't really lying. She was already feeling better now that she'd had one. Oh, good, the pink girl sighed. I thought that jerk from the hall might have pushed you over some kinda edge there for a minute. She said with a little less worry in her voice. Himiko blushed. Yeah, that was really embarrassing, the girl sighed. Hey, don't sweat it, I was the one making you laugh, after all, Mina shrugged, so, yeah, sorry about that. Himiko giggled. No, it's fine, really, I was totally freaking out until you started chatting with me. She said as their group gathered outside the gates of the testing area. I'm not really good with people, yet, but you really brought me out of my shell. Mina beamed at her. I can get along with most anyone with an open mind, she giggled before tucking a fluffy lock of hair behind her ear. So, that guy with the green hair, that was your brother, right? Toga smiled at her. My foster brother, yeah, the girl nodded before remembering. Oh, no, he never called you, did he? Yeah, no. She said, sounding a little upset. I guess I was a little too forward, or... Himiko shook her head. No, it's nothing like that, she told her. Izu's even shyer than I am. She explained, especially around girls he likes. she said with a small smile toward her, making the girl's cheeks turn lavender. Plus, he doesn't have a lot of confidence in himself, but that's a work in progress. Really? Mina seemed to perk up at that. You think he'd? The gates started opening up in front of them. Up on the wall a speaker blared out, "Well, what are you waiting for?" Present Mike's voice roared out, "There's no 1 2 3 go in this school. Get moving." A breath later both girls found themselves in the middle of a stampede as the other students rushed in to start earning their points. "Hey," Himiko shouted, "no shoving. Watch where you're touching." She heard Mina shout angrily, "Ow, my nose." Himiko looked back and saw the girl holding her nose, blood dripping through her fingers. Himiko immediately felt her hunger for blood flare up. Oh no. She looked away and started shoving her way through the throng of people in order to get away from the girl before she caught her blood scent. Oh no, oh no, oh no. Suddenly, it hit her like a freight train. The warm, sweet, savory scent of her blood called out to her like an oasis. No. In a sudden burst of speed and strength, she leapt up and over the stampede of students and away from the far too tempting scent of fresh blood. She landed and ducked into an alley, digging her pills out of her pocket, and scarfed down a handful of them. "Keep it together, Himiko," she snapped at herself, "it's just a little blood. You can handle this. Keep it together." Her eyes were welling up with tears as she gulped down the dissolving pills, thick red liquid spilling out of her mouth. Her eyes seemed to glow as the blood pills filled her. It wasn't enough. Just the lingering scent of Mina's blood was driving her nuts with hunger, bringing out her savage side. Over to her left she heard the sound of an engine before spotting one of the robots that she was supposed to destroy. Good, the girl thought with a sense of relief, now I have something to vent on. She licked her lips before she attacked the three-pointer. In the observation room, Toshinori was watching the ensuing chaos of the practical exams with worry. His eyes were on the young blonde girl that was having trouble with her need for blood. "Nezu, those blood tablets were a good idea," he muttered as they watched the girl desperately trying to control herself, "but I think we're going to need another solution." Next to him, Vlad nodded, "She's acting like a recovering addict." He noted as she savagely attacked any of the mechanical menaces that came near her, but he also noticed that she was actively avoiding any of the students, but she's obviously conscious of her actions, and she's trying to avoid any sort of temptation. "But I can see the struggle. The poor girl," said Recovery Girl, "when she's enrolled, we'll need to see about helping her with that." Agreed, Nezu nodded, noting that she had already collected the required points for her to pass the exam, but he also took notice of something else. She's also actively helping the other students. "Did you notice that?" he asked of the shabby teacher next to him on the right. Aizawa nodded. "I did," he muttered, "for someone with such an addiction, she's doing quite well." "How many rescue points has she gotten?" "A solid 30, said Midnight. "At this point she's got 78 points in total with combat and rescue point combined." She looked over at Toshinori. "All Might, how are the two boys doing?" Toshinori looked over at the screen that showed Shinso using the proto-tool as a rifle. "He's doing well." The man said with a proud smile, "He's got more rescue points than he does combat points, though. Not a bad thing per se. He'll definitely need some more work if he gets the required points." "And Midoriya?" Vlad asked. The teacher's eyes all turned to the screen that showed the young man. All Might chuckled. "Oh, he's doing just fine." He laughed. "That makes 20, Izuku said in his new voice while he looked at the molten remains of the robot he had just destroyed. The form he had chosen wasn't the most dangerous, but it was the most versatile in his arsenal. His body was now composed of a super-hot inner plasma body covered by dark reddish-brown volcanic rocks. His feet had a slight oval-like design with only 2 toes and 1 back toe. His head was also made of fire while his collarbone resembled a volcano which generated a fiery hair that covers his head, leaving his mask-like face visible with no nose or ears. Another one-pointer suddenly appeared in front of him. He held out his hand and fired a torrent of flames at the machine. The fire grew so hot that the robot was incinerated into molten slag. Heat blast. This plasma-based alien is a living, breathing volcano. He can produce and control existing flames, adding them to his own firepower, or extinguish them at will. He can also fly by using pyrokinetic powers, surf on volcanic rock, or by using his flames as propulsion. His fire is so hot that it can even burn underwater, and survive extreme cold for short amounts of time, but enough time in the water will extinguish his flames, and he can't burn crystal-based materials such as petrosapiens or fireproof substances in general. Plus, his fiery body makes it super easy to find him in the dark. Okay, better keep moving, he said to himself before tapping the symbol on his chest and returning to normal. He ran down the street and turned a corner, finding an absolute mob of students locked in combat with several robots. Thinking quick, he dialed the Ultimatrix into upgrade and transformed. He then molded himself onto the nearest robot that had been taken down, a one-pointer, and crafted into a more animal-like shape. This is more like it. He ran off on all fours, the sides of his body opening up to reveal missile launchers. There were a few stragglers that hadn't joined the mob yet, which gave him perfect targets. He fired his missiles, and destroyed a group of 2 3-pointers, a 1 and a 2-pointer. And that makes 30. The galvanic mechamorph was pleased. Toshinori chuckled at the boy. He's doing well, he said, he just passed the 30-point marker. He's being rather subdued, isn't he? Midnight asked. Aren't those forms powerful enough to do more damage than that? Nezu nodded as he recalled reading the boy's notes on the alien forms. Indeed they are, and I believe that his lack of force is due to the massive collateral damage he could cause if he went all out in that area. He said, you should know from how he hesitated to use his most powerful form against Cementos when we were testing them. He is quite reluctant to cause casualties. I remember. Midnight nodded, and with so many students within close range, he wouldn't just cause casualties, he'd cause a massacre. She sighed. That boy may be dangerous, as Aizawa said, but he certainly has a good head on his shoulders if he's holding himself back in this mad dash situation. And that is something that we should be thankful for, Aizawa said, he said as he watched the transformed teen snatch another student away from a downed robot that threatened to fall on him. Nezu, add 5 rescue points from me onto his count. 5. Power Loader laughed. That was worth at least 10. He said, that's my vote. That robot could have caused some serious injuries if it had fallen on that poor kid. Toshinori shook his head. It was kinda sloppy, so 7 from me. Now, Nezu chuckled, tallied up, he has more than enough to pass. He looked over at Power Loader. Majima, I think it's about that time, isn't it? Power Loader checked his watch. Ah, you're right. He grinned beneath his helmet. All right then, now we get to see who the real heroes are. He chuckled almost manically as he took a remote control from his seat and pressed the large red button in the center. Across the 6 testing sites, the ground began to rumble as the streets of the fake cities opened up, allowing the giant mechanical monsters within to be set loose. In Himiko's area, the girl had calmed down from her blood-induced aggression, but the hunger was still biting at her. Thankfully the robots had provided a good outlet. When the ground started to shake, however, all thoughts of sating her gnawing hunger was thrown out the window as she looked down the street, thinking that one of the larger robots had caused damage to one of the buildings. She wasn't wrong. However, the robot that she saw was nothing like what she was expecting. Oh, you have got to be kidding me, she yelled as she turned to run, only run smack dab into the last person she needed to right now. Mina had come blundering out of an alleyway, and slammed right into her. Her nose and face still smelled so sweetly of blood that Himiko felt her mouth water almost immediately. Toga. Ashido, we have to run, Himiko shouted as the 0-pointer neared them. She took the girl by the hand and started running with her. Come on. Wait a minute, Mina shouted as she pulled out of her grip. There's still people back there. Himiko stopped, her body growing cold. She looked back over her shoulder at the feet of the robot, seeing at least a dozen or so students running right out from under it. She bit her lip, thinking about what she should do. But Mina had already turned and started running toward the fleeing students to help. Izuku would never forgive her if she just stood by and did nothing. Damn it, she started running toward the robot. Meanwhile, come on, move your asses, Hitoshi shouted as he took shots at the giant machine, hoping to buy some time for the others to escape. He spotted a boy that looked like a praying mantis helping a girl with green vines for hair. Hey, you need any help? He shouted out at the pair. We're fine, the mantis shouted back, but someone's caught under some rubble back there. Alright, I'll take care of it. Hitoshi didn't even need to think about it. He ran toward the area where the monster had crashed through. Hello. Can anyone hear me? He yelled. Shout if you can hear me. A small hand poked out of a pile, waving him down. Here. I'm over here. It was a girl's voice that was shouting at him. I can't get out. Standby mode. Hitoshi muttered to the tool and placed it back on his shoulder as it compacted back down. He crouched down as he reached the pile and found very petite girl with brown hair trapped under a large slab of concrete. Alright, are you in any sort of pain? Any trouble breathing at all? He asked when he saw no sign of blood except for some minor cuts and scrapes. I can hardly breathe, shroom. The girl whimpered. Please. I don't wanna die, shroom. Hitoshi got to work. The concrete slab was just barely propped up on another piece below it. She must be caught on something, he thought as he moved to try and lift the slab. Alright, I'm gonna try to lift this now. He warned her, if you feel at any time that you can move, crawl out if you can. If you can't, just stay put, and I'll keep trying. But the robot, shroom. He looked over his shoulder at the gigantic machine. It didn't seem to be paying attention to them as the massive treads it moved with rolled beneath it. Don't you worry about that oversized toaster, Hitoshi said, sweating a little as the machine was passing them by. It looks like it doesn't actively target people. He knelt down and grasped the concrete. Ready. The girl nodded at him. Okay, 1, 2, 3. He planted his legs, lifted with all his might. The slab moved, but the girl didn't. I still can't move, shroom, she cried. My legs caught on something, shroom. Hitoshi didn't answer, fearing any lapse in concentration would cause him to lose his grip and crush the girl. His arms were burning, and his legs were screaming in protest as he lifted the slab higher. Finally the heavy slab crested, and started to fall opposite of him. Once it was out of his hands, he knelt and checked the girl over. He found that another smaller slab was pinning her left leg down, making it impossible for her to escape. Okay, you're gonna be fine, now, he assured her before calmly reaching down to remove the block and help her to her feet. She yelped as she tried to put weight on her leg. Hitoshi cursed himself for not checking to see it was injured, and knelt down in front of her. Hop on, he commanded. With a small whimper, the girl complied, wrapping both arms around his neck. His face burned as he felt something pleasantly soft press against his back. Ignore it, Shinso, he chanted in his head while the girl settled on his back. Cute girls do not like creepers. Don't be a creep, he stood up, his hands tucked under her knees. Damn, she's so light. I'm sorry, shroom, the girl mumbled. I'm pretty heavy, aren't I? Hitoshi shook his head. Nah, not a bit. He smiled over his shoulder. Now come on, let's find you some help. Inside the observation room, many of the teachers were applauding the young brainwasher as he carried the girl to safety. Meanwhile, Himiko and Ashido were doing their best to direct the fleeing students in their area. Fortunately, the two girls realized that the monster machine only had one gear, forward. Even as it smashed and crashed through buildings, if you stayed out of its way, then you were safe. Unfortunately, panic tended to overrule anything resembling reason, and the two girls trying to direct the crowd were having hell doing so. Stop pushing, Mina shouted as one student barged past another, knocking them to the ground. She helped them up, sending them on their way, and tried to keep the crowd moving. Himiko was in the same mess that she was as she helped a girl up from getting shoved out of the way by someone trying to save their own hide. Keep it moving, she told the students, not truly paying attention to the robots. If she had been, then she would have seen the large three-pointer sneaking up on her and taking aim with its weapons. Get into the allies, it won't follow you. Just stay out of its direct path, AHK. She felt a sharp, blunt blow to her back as she was propelled forward right into the path of the zero-pointer, her head cracking down onto the street, and blood pooling beneath her brow. Toga, Mina rushed forward and grasped her under the shoulders. Come on, girl, don't you cop out on me now, she cried as she dragged the girl to safety. But she was moving too slow with the girl in her arms, even if she was small in frame. The zero-pointer was coming toward them at a frightening pace. "Get outta here," Himiko whimpered. Mina glared at her. "Like hell I am." She threw something from her hand as the zero-pointer's foot came toward them. "Close your eyes, honey." She pushed Himiko's face into her bosom while the girl cried and the monster stepped on them. As darkness came over her, she expected to be crushed, however that never happened. Daylight came again as the zero-pointer stepped again, revealing a hole melted into its foot where they had found safety. She looked up at Mina, who was now grinning at her with glee on her face as well as relief. Inside the observation room, Toshinori was on his feet applauding the girl. "Well done. Well done indeed." The man shouted happily as he smiled at the scene in front of them. "That girl is going to go far once she's gotten her license." Midnight laughed as the two girls got to their feet, Himiko leaning on Mina for support. "That they will," she said with a smile. "In fact, once the internships come up, I think I'd like both of them as my apprentices." "A wonderful idea." Toshinori grinned in agreement. "They could learn a lot from you, Ms. Midnight." Aizawa frowned as his comrade fawned over the acts of heroism, but his eyes were still on the green-haired boy as he transformed again into the burning alien, Heat Blast. The zero-pointer in his area was just as much of a spectacle as the others, but this one was causing more damage because some of the students had provoked it into attacking in all directions. It was supposed to move forward unless attacked, and on that note, it was supposed to be an unstoppable force for rookie students like these children to fear and not even think about going against. But Mina Ishido had damaged one. Hitoshi Shinso had stared one in the face, and not even flinched as he rescued a student. And now Izuku Midoriya. Dot was staring one down as though he looked closer. "There's a student right under that thing." He rose. "Majima, shut it down." "Right." Power Loader said before pressing the kill switch, and again, and again. "It's not responding." "Oh, my." Recovery Girl was up in an instant running for the door. "I need to get down there." Toshinori transformed into his muscle form and picked her up. "I'll escort you," he said as he placed the woman on his shoulder. "Wait," Midnight shouted. "Look at Midoriya." All turned their gazes back to the screen, and saw the blazing form of Heat Blast glowing dangerous hot. Out on the field with Izuku, the boy-turned-alien was not just thinking of the robot, but the girl beneath its feet as it moved forward. "Come on." He ground out as his body glowed with heat and the surrounding street started to melt. "Come on. Hotter. Go even hotter." His yellow flames shifted to white, and then began to turn blue. "Come on." Behind him, the blue-haired boy that had called out to Himiko watched in shock as the fiery being melted the asphalt beneath his feet. What is he doing? He wondered out loud before looking toward the giant's feet, catching sight of the girl. Oh no. With the roar of a jet engine, Heat Blast shot off of the ground like a ballistic missile, rocketing toward the zero-pointer. On the spot special move. He thrust out his arms in front of him. Final burst. The burning pyronite soared over the stunned girl, her eyes wide with awe as he slammed into the giant mech, crumpling the outer shell, and pushing it back with tremendous force as a small explosion went off from the impact as the crumpled metal gave way to the heat, melting away. Heat Blast then blew right through the machine and out the other side, but not before the intense heat coming from his body set fire to the inner workings. Flames as hot as a volcano spread through the zero-pointer, melting the insides into molten metal while it poured out of every crack and crevice. Damn! Heat Blast saw the molten metal pour from the dying machine, while the girl was still trapped. He blasted back to the ground and made a quick change to fast track, blurring across the street and scooping the girl up just before a stream of molten metal splashed down on her. BBB, ah, nuts. Fast Track yelped as the Ultimatrix ran out of energy. Woo. In a flash of green the feline speedster was gone, replaced by plain and ordinary Izuku Midoriya trying to put on the brakes, very large emphasis on trying here. He was already speeding away from the burning machine, so when he tried to stop, not only did it not work, but he tripped, forcing himself to tuck and roll so that the girl in his arms wouldn't get hurt. Fortunately the boy from before was there to stop them. He sped up to them and stopped their advance with engines coming out of his calves. What speed! The teen thought as he stopped the green-haired teen. he was moving faster than anyone from my family. Are you two all right? The teen asked. Ow. Yeah, but I'm really, ULP. The girl started before she turned green and vomited, thankfully missing her savior, while Izuku groaned, his eyes swirling around dizzily. DD don't take me out CC coach, the boy muttered. A horn sounded overhead, and that's the game, listeners. Present Mike called out, time's up. If any of you have any injuries, please head to the infirmary right away, please, and if you need help, be sure to ask for it. Fortunately or unfortunately, Izuku, Hitoshi and Himiko were all in the infirmary afterward. Izuku for a slight concussion thanks to his Ultimatrix timing out at the absolute worst moment. He was holding an ice pack to his head. The girl he had saved, Ochako Uraraka, was being treated for severe motion sickness. Hitoshi was there for a few minor scrapes and bruises, while also keeping the young girl he had rescued company while Recovery Girl worked on her injured leg. Himiko also had a slight concussion from landing on the street too hard, and had a bandage wrapped around her head with an ice pack of her own against it. She was also bodying on a straw from a styrofoam cup so no one could see the blood inside. Vlad had made sure to give several bags to Recovery Girl just in case. Mina Ishido was also present for a broken nose. The only one of the group not present was Mei Hatsume. Came into the infirmary looking like she'd just been dumpster diving. Man, you guys look crap, she said loudly. They all looked at her pointedly as she also had a few minor burns on her face and hands. She took one look at her friends and grinned. So, how'd it go for you guys? Izuku moaned in pain. Himiko held her head, so loud. She moaned with Mina rubbing her back. Dear, sweetie, Mina said with her nasally voice. Her nose was bound up at the moment, so she sounded a little off. What the hell happened to you? Hitoshi asked since he was the only one in any shape to actually inquire. What did you do? Blow up the classroom? Mei rubbed the back of her neck with her tongue sticking out playfully. Yeah, I kinda did, hey. Hitoshi looked at her. Izuku actually sat up, giving the girl a look that said, seriously. Before falling back onto the bed with a groan. The brainwasher shook his head. My god, why can't I have normal friends, and not these whacked out maniacs? Mei giggled. Ah, you love us and you know it. That line is gonna get old one of these days. Hitoshi growled a little too loudly for the foster siblings, both of them groaning pitifully. Sorry guys. Recovery Girl chuckled. You kids these days, she shook her head, you should all count yourselves lucky. The 0-point robot in Mr. Midoriya's area malfunctioned quite badly, she said as she looked at the poor girl holding her stomach, who looked remarkably like the girl whose leg she was working on. If he hadn't destroyed it, I'd shudder to think what would have happened to you, young lady. Ochako just smiled shakily. Why yeah, I almost bought the farm out there, she said as she gave her savior a small smile. Thanks a lot, by the way. The boy in question just shook his head. I'm just sorry that I almost screwed it up so badly, Izuku muttered. I didn't think that I'd heated the robot up so much that it actually caught on fire. Hitoshi grumbled. You and your mutations. The boy pinched the bridge of his nose. Wait, Mina said, looking at the boy, I thought you were some kind of 4-armed strong dude. Ochako shook her head. No, he changed from some burning guy to this blue, furry cat thing that was really fast. She said a little loudly in her excitement. My head. Izuku and Himiko moaned as the girl's voice worsened their collective headaches. The girl blushed. Oops, she pressed her fingers to her lips, sorry. Unfortunately for her, her quirk activated and caused her to lift off the bed. Oh no. Mei cackled loudly, setting off another round of hisses and pained moans. The mood around the table that evening was a jovial one as the children all laughed and recounted their participation in the practical exams. Toshinori had invited Izuku and his friends out as soon as they had been released by Recovery Girl, which also included Kanoko Komori, Ochako Uraraka, and Mina Ishido. Kanoko, a shy little thing with a bob cut that covered her eyes, had nearly refused, but Toshinori insisted while Shinso had heartily agreed. Ochako had been unable to turn down the idea of free food and Mina wanted to spend more time with Himiko and Izuku, much to the latter's delight and embarrassment. Mina, however, was the only one that had called her parents to let them know where she was. Turns out both Ochako and Kanoko were living alone just as Shinso was, though for entirely different reasons. Ochako's parents worked out in the country, and couldn't afford to be away from work too long, while Kanoko's parents were simply out of town for the week. When Inko had heard about what all had gone on during the tests, she had nearly fainted. Not only had her son destroyed a giant robot, but her surrogate daughter had been injured, and nearly trampled by one. "Oh, you brave little angel." Inko had immediately grabbed the pink-skinned girl in one of her bone-crushing hugs and bawled her eyes out. "Order whatever you want, kids, it's all on me." Toshinori had laughed a moment later when Izuku and Himiko had managed to rescue the girl from the grateful, worried mother. None of the children had hesitated, though Kanoko did take some coaxing from Shinso. The blonde man noticed that the two were nearly joined at the hip after meeting up with them. Hee. He chuckled while the kids made their orders. "I can already see a bright future for these kids." Inko nodded as she watched her son and surrogate daughter talking about something she couldn't hear while they made their orders. "Is it wrong that I still worry about them becoming heroes?" she asked with a hint of sadness in her voice. "I mean, I know that I'd be crushing Izuku's dream if I told him that I wanted him to stop, but even being a student in a hero school is dangerous. Doten, he and Himiko are all I have." Toshinori frowned a little. "Ultimate Alliance High School is one of the best in the business, and I'm not just saying that as All Might's agent," he told her with confidence in his voice. "They're dedicated to seeing that their students are made into the best heroes that they can be before being sent out into the world." Inko nodded slowly even though he could still see the worry etched onto her face. He reached across the table, and, "He really isn't all you have, you know." Inko felt her cheeks grow warm as his large hand covered her own. It was a stark contrast to her own. Where hers were small with just the hint of calluses on her palms, his felt like sandpaper, yet she could feel the gentleness in them. And that same touch was enough to send shivers running up her arm all the way down her spine. "Toshi, you're only saying that because of all the weight I've lost over these last few months," she said, though it was by far the weakest excuse she had ever heard, even from her own mouth. "Not true, my dear." Toshinori smiled as her, loosely lacing their fingers together. "I already thought you were quite lovely when we first met." He chuckled while the woman's face gained some color. "And that was just from a small glance." He continued on as Inko began to worry her lips. "As we spent more time together, I began to realize that." He looked down at their entwined hands, and then back up at her. "Inko, I am in love with you." In that one moment Inko felt like her heart was going to explode out of her chest. "Oh, my, Toshinori, you shouldn't. I'm not just saying this because of you, Inko." He shook his head, turning his gaze toward the group of children, his eyes landing on the young boy that had brought them together, "That boy over there. He's come to mean more to me than I ever could have imagined." He smiled proudly. "So many times I've seen him rise to the occasion while training. And he's proven himself a true hero in my eyes many times over." He chuckled and turned back to her. "Yet he still manages to scare the bejesus out of me when he does something astounding like talking down a dangerous villain." He looked toward Himiko, noticing that the girl was popping one of her blood pills into her mouth, or saving a little girl from an abusive home. Inko gave the man a very proud, yet timid smile. "He looks up to you a great deal, you know," she said, her heart thundering into her ribs rapidly, "just like a father." Toshinori smiled happily. "I do think of him like a son, or at least what I think of being a father would feel like," he said. "I've only ever had little Melissa as the closest thing to a child, and she calls me her uncle." He laughed. "But with you too, I feel like I'm actually part of a family." She squeezed his fingers tightly. "It's not so easy on my part, Toshi," she muttered. "My husband. Pardon me, ex-husband. I thought he was the one, but," she shrugged slowly, "well, you know how well that ended." He nodded with a bit of a scowl on his face. She looked at him pensively. "And I know that you're different from him, but I." He reached over and covered their hands with his free one. "I'm not asking us to run over to the nearest chapel to get hitched," he said, making the woman squeak. "I'd love nothing more than to take this as slow as you want." Her smile returned. "We haven't even been on a proper date." Toshinori grinned at her. "I bet I can fix that," he said with a hint of challenge in his voice. Do you think you'd like to try? Inko gave a small laugh. I'm quite the mess, you know. She reminded him. I've only just started my exposure therapy, and that's not even counting what Izuku's going to have to go through. She shivered, and there's all this paperwork I need to get through concerning little Himiko. She gained some heat in her voice. You know that my lawyer called yesterday about sending her somewhere else. Toshinori frowned. Nezu would never allow that. He assured her before giving her a grin. You dodged the question, by the way. Inko giggled and rolled her eyes. I think I'm up to trying. She smiled. As long as you don't mind a broken little family like mine. Not broken. Toshinori smiled at her, just unique. Meanwhile, hey, Izu, Himiko said while retrieving her tray of food, I'm probably wrong again, but is there something between her mom and Mr. Yagi? She asked, nearly biting her tongue at the slip. Izuku just turned to her with a beaming smile. I really hope there is, he said with a happy blush on his face. He asked her out on a date not long after meeting us. Ah, that's so sweet. Mina squealed, the hint of a romance too tempting for her to pass up. I was wondering why he acted like your dad sometimes, but I didn't think he was romancing your mom. Hitoshi just shrugged at her. I don't really think he's had that much time to do much romancing, he said while handing a drink off to Kanoko, jolting when he felt her fingers wrap around his by accident. Sorry, Komori. And no, P. Porcini eep. She yelped as soon as the words left her mouth and covered it with her free hand. Mina was the one that laughed first. Was that a pun? She giggled. Kanoko nodded with embarrassment. Oh, don't be embarrassed, it was cute. Porcini is a type of mushroom, right? May asked. My dad took me to an Italian restaurant once, and I think those were part of the main dish. Kanoko nodded. I kinda like making mushroom puns, she said, her face steaming. My quirk, mushroom, makes mushrooms grow, so I thought it would be funny. Hitoshi just gave a small grin. Well, I don't mind it. I think it's cool, Izuku said, doing his best not to geek out about her quirk. If you don't mind, May reached over and bonked him on the head. Ow. May, what the heck? We're celebrating tonight. Doofus, no quirk research until we get into UA. She admonished. She turned to the confused Kanoko and Ochako. He loves doing quirk analysis on any new quirk he comes across. Heck, he broke mine down in a few seconds after I explained it to him, and gave me pointers on how to use it when I'm making new babies. She means her support gear. Hitoshi and Izuku blurted out when the word babies left May's lips, earning them a glare from the girl in question. Anyway, May snapped at the two of them. Don't think you two are safe, she said with a gesture in their direction. He'll pester you for hours. Mina giggled as she bumped Izuku's shoulder lightly. How come you haven't asked me about mine, yet? Well, I was gonna, but, Izuku started but a look from May stopped him. May's gonna hit me again. May, don't be mean, Hitoshi said warned her, or the next time I use my quirk, I'll make you wear one of those frocks Mrs. Bakugo stuck Himiko in. May looked at him angrily. You just try it, Buster. May's eyes went blank while Hitoshi just grinned at her. Her eyes then refocused, and she shook her head rapidly. Yeesh, she shivered before glaring at the boy. Why you? Oh, come on. Ochako giggled as she came between the two of them. Let's calm down and enjoy the food. I'll second that, Kanoko squeaked, hoping to defuse the situation before the two of them came to blows. Izuku and the group laughed while keeping May from throttling the grinning brainwasher. He saw that the two adults were still talking, and decided to move to a different table. Most of the booths were taken, however, and the tables were all two-seaters, which meant they had some pairing up to do. He tried to sit with either Hitoshi or May, even Himiko, but May grabbed a seat with Ochako while Hitoshi sat with Kanoko. Himiko, you sit with us, too, May said with a grin on her face. The table they had grabbed was one of the few four-seaters. Izuku grimaced and gave Mina a small smile. You can go ahead and sit with the girls, if you want. He offered. Mina looked affronted. What, moi? Leave you to sit by your lonesome? She asked with faux outrage. Mr. Midoriya, Just what kind of woman do you take me for? Izuku was thrown. Dealing with girls was still a new thing for him, even if he had to deal with Mei's antics on a daily basis, which also meant that he was getting used to female nudity, but that did nothing to help him when it came to speaking with a girl like this bright, bubbly pink ball of energy. She took him by his elbow, the warmth of her hand on his skin sending goose bumps all over him, while balancing her tray in the other hand and pulled him over to a free table. He then found himself plunked down in a chair across from the bright-eyed girl as she took her seat with a beaming smile. So, she giggled when the boy gave her a nervous smile. Himmy babe told me that there was a reason behind why you never called me. Izuku's face went pale, and then bright red all at once, which made the girl laugh even harder. I'm so sorry. It's not that I didn't want to. A dainty pink finger rose up and tapped him on the nose. His nose felt like someone had just zapped him with a static shock. I'm not mad, the girl told him with those eyes of hers alight with mirth. Himiko just told me that you're way shyer than she is, so I couldn't stay upset for long after hearing that. She smiled at him and leaned on her hands. So, what do you say we start over from here? She asked with a bat of her lashes. Izuku blushed. From here. Yepers, she beamed while slapping the table lightly with her palm. Right here. She said before reaching for her shake. Vanilla was her favorite, and taking a long drink. So let's start like this. She reached out her free hand to him. Hi, I'm Mina Ashido. Izuku almost laughed. A small snort escaped him as he hesitantly reached out to take her hand. And I'm Izuku Midoriya. She gripped his hand gently, a happy lavender-colored blush adorning her cheeks. It's very nice to meet you. The girl smiled at him, letting go to start working on her large order of black pepper French fries. Got any fun hobbies? Izuku worried his lip. Well, I think it's fun, so I guess my hobby is analyzing different quirks and how they can be used. He admitted, like how Himiko uses her quirk to transform into others. Himiko called out from her table, keep that part of my quirk to yourself, please. She asked pleadingly, I'm begging you here. The boy rubbed the back of his neck bashfully. Sorry, Himiko, he chuckled before turning his attention back to the pink-skinned girl before him. But, yeah, I love analyzing Q quirks and how they can be used. Mina's smile never dropped an inch. That sounds like a really interesting hobby, she said, her lips dropping slightly, like something a super smart guy would do. She said, me, not so much. She sighed before her gleaming smile returned, but I totes love dancing. She proclaimed, it's one of the ways I keep myself in shape. Her eyes drifted to his exposed forearms, noting just how muscular they were, a little fact that made her want to lick her lips. But you look like you lift a lot of weights, she inquired, pushing the slight urge down. Izuku failed to notice the deepening of her blush as he flexed his right hand. Not really, he said, I mean I do a little weight training, but I mostly just did a whole lot of cleaning. Mina nearly slipped out of her chair. Cleaning made you ripped? She almost shouted, astonished. Just what kind of cleaning did he do to get guns like those? She thought idly. Well, yeah, Izuku nodded, but I think I would have preferred dancing when I think about the pure hell I went through. He chuckled while looking over at Toshinori and his mother. Mr. Yagi really put me through the ringer to get me in shape for UA. Mina smiled at the two adults. Oh, I don't know, she giggled, not seeing how the skeletal man could do much harm when he acted so friendly. He seems like a really nice guy, she mumbled dreamily as she watched him and Izuku's mother chatting happily. You know, if they do end up together, I hope they're happy. Izuku silently agreed, and hoped that she was right. By the way, if you like dancing so much, he reached for his burger, unwrapping it, maybe you should look into some fighting styles that incorporate dancing. Mina blinked owlishly before she eagerly leaned toward him. Is there something like that? She asked exuberantly. Izuku was so surprised that he dropped his burger and nearly fell out of his seat. Her leaning forward had given him a perfect view of her collarbone just below the neck of her shirt. Lucky for him, she seemed to see his behavior as discomfort at her enthusiasm, so she sat back down and placed her hands together, seemingly none the wiser. Sorry, but that really surprised me. She giggled as the boy settled back into his seat and picked up his meal. Anyway. There's a dance style that I can use for fighting. Izuku nodded. Why yeah, it's called capoeira, he said, taking a tentative bite. It's really good for defensive fighting, uses dodges, leg sweeps and kicks, plus open palm hits. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone and typing something across the screen, but if I had to compare it to something, then I'd have to say it's a lot like breakdancing. He turned the screen toward her. Mina watched the screen as it played out a fight involving one man flipping around, spinning, landing devastating hits on his opponent. Whoa, she breathed out, captivated by the movements of the capoeira fighter. How have I never heard of this? She wondered with a brilliant smile. She turned her eyes back to the green-eyed teen. Midori, I am so using this. She beamed, her eyes widening happily. This is totally perfect for me. I love it. She reached across the table and hugged the startled boy around the neck. Izuku let out a small yelp as the girl came toward him before his face was smothered in her arms. He would forever recall the moment he was hugged by this beautiful girl, and felt her arms pressing against his face. It was the only way he would be able to look at her in the face ever again without turning into an utter babbling idiot, or causing his nose to do an impression of Old Faithful. Across from them, Hitoshi was shaking his head. That guy has the worst best luck in the world, he muttered before turning back and continuing his conversation with Kanoko, who was smiling shyly at him. Meanwhile Himiko was just burying her face in her hands with barely contained laughter at her foster brother's situation. Mei was pouting toward the pair. I still don't get why he keeps reacting like that, she muttered around her straw, looking at Ochako. The guy's seen me naked dozens of times. Ochako's naturally pink cheeks brightened to neon levels while Himiko just sputtered a giggle. Yeah, but Mei, when you walk around naked, you're just being our Mei, not flirting. She pointed toward Izuku and his potential paramour. I think she actually likes him. Mei huffed. I like him, too, you know. You do? Ochako asked, the whole thing going over her head. But Himiko put a stop to it with a shake of her head. Not like that you don't, the blonde reminded her. Honestly, I'm more afraid of being molested by you than Izuku is. Huh, Ochako's face was getting redder by the second. Mei took mock offense to Himiko's accusation. I would never molest you, she said haughtily while turning her nose up in the air. When I trained on the girl with a slight smirk, I'd ask first. Himiko giggled while Ochako's eyes swirled. Pretty sure I don't play for your team, honey. Give me 5 minutes and you will. Mei laughed. Ochako had had enough of the conversation and covered her face, forgetting about her quirk for the umpteenth time, and floated about the table. Laughter ensued. Several hours later found a certain pink-skinned girl giggling in her room. I'm serious, Mom. She laughed. The poor girl was doing somersaults all over the restaurant. Her mother was laughing right along with her. You sound like you had a wonderful time, she smiled as the girl reclined on her bed, holding a plush pillow to her chest. And I heard about how you saved that girl you made friends with during the written exam. She leaned over and pecked her on the forehead. I'm so proud of you, my darling baby girl. Mina smiled at her. Himiko was way more heroic than I was, she said, sitting up, but there was something about her that seemed off during the practical. She tapped her chin in thought. It was like she was trying to avoid me or something, because she went totally savage on the robots right up until some jerkwad knocked her down and gave her a concussion. I wouldn't worry, dear, her mother said. Whatever the problem was, she sounded like a perfectly lovely girl once you got to know her. I think so, Mina agreed happily. She didn't even get weirded out by how I look. The woman gave the girl a look. Mina, stop that. She admonished her with a light bop on her head between her horns. I told you that no one is going to care about how you look. Mina rolled her eyes. We'll see, but you know mutation types like me always catch a little flack, she said, her voice heavy with skepticism. And, she crossed her arms, her brow creased. Did any of the friends you made today say anything that could be taken like a slur? The girl giggled. Honestly, I spent most of the night teasing Himi's brother, she admitted with a devilish grin. I swear, that boy was so innocent. She sighed, her eyes falling to half-mast. Truth be told, I feel a little insulted that he didn't ask if we could meet up again soon. Her mother gave the girl a knowing look. Oh, dear, what happened now? What didn't happen? Mina threw herself onto her bed. I threw almost every flirt in the book at him, and he didn't even try to make a pass at me. This coming from the same girl that so adamantly denied having a crush on her savior. Her mother asked with a throaty chuckle, and dodged a thrown pillow courtesy of her daughter. Well, it's true, darling, you denied that you had feelings for the boy. Mina huffed and laid on her stomach, resting her chin on her arms. Doesn't mean I mind getting a little attention from a cute boy once in a while, she muttered, though, in truth, the entire debacle involving her teasing the boy had left her more than a little steamed under the collar. When she had hugged him earlier, she had meant it as nothing more than a friendly gesture, which would have doubled as a bit of physical teasing, but, annoyingly, her hormonal teenage self had not accounted for those very same hormones. She thanked whatever lucky star she was under that Izuku wasn't the type of guy that ogled, or else he would have noticed how her nipples had pebbled from the contact, brief as it was. Her mother laughed. Well, I'm sure that you'll have plenty of opportunities when you two are in school together, she said before looking at her sternly when the girl gave her a look, and don't you even think about your looks putting anyone off. My guess is that the boys will be all over you. Right, she said skeptically while gesturing to her body, the only thing they'll be all over is my figure. Well, you have to start somewhere, her mother winked at her, which caused them both to start laughing. But in all seriousness, dear, when you move into the dorms. If I move into the dorms, Mina corrected with a small sigh, remember that I haven't been given my results, yet. Her mother rolled her eyes. All right, if you move into the dorms, she relented, if you move into the dorms, and find yourself someone special, I want you to be as careful as you possibly can be, sweetie. She gave the girl a suggestive look that told her exactly what she meant. Ah, Mom, Mina groaned with a huge blush rising to her cheeks, come on. I'm not. Her mother raised her hand to stall her. I know that you're not planning anything serious, she said, a small smile on her face, but what you have planned, and how things pan out are rarely one and the same, dear. She reminded her. Mina sighed, knowing that her mother was still quite young compared to most. When she had come along, her mother was just entering her 3rd year of high school. It was by luck that her dad had been the loving and responsible type. Okay, Mom, I'll pack some birth control if I get accepted. Not just pills, sweetie, her mother said. I want you to pack at least 1 box of condoms. Mina huffed. Okay, aren't you being a little overly cautious? The girl asked. STDs are nothing to scoff at, dear, her mother laughed. Besides, pills can only do so much, you know. Mina giggled. Mom, have you read the labels on some of Midnight's brand name pills? She asked while her mother just shook her head with a half-smile on her face as she got up from the bed. Good night, Mom. Good night, my little Martian, she giggled as her daughter stuck her tongue out at her for the use of her father's pet name. Mina laid down on her pillow, turning off the little lamp beside her bed. Capoeira, huh? She mumbled to herself quietly while she pulled the covers over herself, a smile coming back to her lips. Izuku fell flat on his back on his bed, exhausted from the day he had had. Not only had the exams been as brutal as he had anticipated, but the fact that one Mina Ashido had forced him to take the coldest shower of his life was going to be burned into his memory for as long as he lived. I can't believe she hugged me, thought the boy for the 100th time that evening. When he first met her, Izuku had already thought that Mina was more beautiful than any girl that he had ever met, but after this second meeting there was no doubt in his mind, he was in love. The only problem was his everything. He crossed his arms over his face, moaning, dream on, Izuku, he thought tiredly, I should be happy enough that I can be a hero, now. There's no way Ashido would like me like that. It was hopeless in his mind. When thinking of what a girl like Mina Ashido would want in a boyfriend, he was not it. In his eyes, Mina was confident, bright, cheerful, friendly, and incredibly beautiful. When Izuku thought of himself, plain and ordinary. She liked my muscles, though, he looked at his arms, remembering when they were nothing by noodles where now they were strong and toned to the point that he barely recognized himself. And he looked often just to remind himself that he was no longer the beanpole that he used to be. All Might had even made it a point of his training that his body was severely lacking when it came to base strength. He'd even snapped a few pictures with his phone during the beginning of how scrawny his body had been. Now Izuku felt that he could be proud of his body. His newly formed six-pack and well-toned pectorals were like a badge of honor, or in his case, a purple heart. Those sparring matches had been brutal when All Might had been throwing the punches. If someone asked Izuku how his life was going at the moment, he would almost certainly respond that all of his dreams were coming true. But still, that one girl had all but turned his world upside down. Even thinking about her gave him butterflies in his stomach. Her radiant smile that seemed to light up the room whenever she walked in. Her uniquely beautiful skin, her eyes and their soft golden glow. He sat up, shaking his head vigorously. All right, enough is enough, he told himself out loud before getting up and heading over to his desk. If I keep this up, I'll need another shower. He pulled one of his notebooks off the shelf above the desk and laid it down. It was a fresh, crisp new notebook that Toshinori had bought for him, the cover made of genuine leather, a congratulatory gift for graduating from Aldera Junior High. It was such a nice book that Izuku almost felt bad about using it. Almost, it was a gift from All Might, of course he was going to use it. He had already made a few entries into the book, the first few being those of his newest friends and family. May was on the first few pages, a detailed sketch of the pink-haired mechanic with her trademark goggles on her head. Her quirk took up at least 2 pages, though since she didn't use it for combat, he refrained from making too many suggestive recommendations. Shinso was next, though his combat suggestions were much more fleshed out than May's since he planned to become a hero himself. Himiko had 4 pages dedicated to her quirk and its applications. Now he was starting a whole new page. He started out what was supposed to be a quick sketch of his subject, but as the minutes ticked by, he found that, when he finished the sketch, well over an hour had passed as he detailed the sketch-turned-portrait. Coming out of his reverie, he groaned, having taken up the entire page with the full-body portrait of the girl that was now taking up what little brain power he had left. He plunked his head down on his desk. What is wrong with me? I do believe that people call it being infatuated. To say hearing the voice of an adult male in the room that wasn't Toshinori Yagi freaked Izuku out was an understatement. The boy let out a loud yelp and tumbled out of his chair, and crashed to the floor. He looked up and saw none other than Professor Paradox standing over him with a slightly apologetic look on his face. Izuku, his mother called out as he heard her feet pounding toward his room. I heard you yelling, dear, is everything all right? When she came bursting through the door and saw the stranger standing over her son, she acted immediately by using her quirk to grasp the nearest heavy object, in this case a ceramic bust of All Might, and sent it hurtling toward the man's head. Lucky for the good professor, he ducked out of the bust's way, and even managed to catch it before it crashed against the wall in the same moment that Izuku pulled himself together enough to shout, Mom, wait. Quite the stunning likeness, the professor noted as he set the bust on Izuku's desk and reached to help the boy himself up, and I do apologize for startling you, my young friend. He said while he helped the boy to his feet before looking to his apprehensive mother, also I deeply apologize for simply barging in at this late hour, Ms. Midoriya. He said with an incline of his head. I would appreciate an explanation, Inko said with a tremble in her voice, her eyes darting to the hall where Himiko had come out of her room, a box cutter in hand to defend herself and her family if need be. Who exactly are you, sir, and how do you know my son? The professor smiled in his usual friendly manner. My name is Professor Paradox, dear lady, he introduced himself, and it was I that gave Izuku his Ultimatrix, allowing him to become strong enough to be a hero. He said explained, his eyes falling on the young blonde girl peeking around the doorframe, and it was I that gave Headmaster Nezu the documents that allowed the lovely Miss Toga to be safely taken from her parents' custody. Himiko came out of hiding with a look of shock on her face. You did that? She asked, her voice quiet and disbelieving. He really did, Izuku said with a smile. He was there when Nezu got the call that you'd run away. The tension in Inko's posture seemed to lighten, though she still seemed ready to pounce on the man if he proved a threat. It's nice to finally meet the man that saved both of my children, she said, noticing the happily lift in Himiko's lips, but it doesn't explain what you're doing here so early in the morning. She said while looking at the clock on Izuku's desk. It read 2 a.m. An error on my part, madam, he said with a hint of embarrassment in his voice. It was then that the man took something from his white coat, producing a small parcel. As promised, I've brought an upgrade for Izuku's Ultimatrix, he said, as well as a gift from his mentor, of a sorts. He said, and passed the parcel to the boy. Izuku saw no problem with it, and eagerly accepted the parcel. Izuku, dear, perhaps, Inko started, but it was too late as her son tore into the package. She palmed her face. Oh, dear. The professor smiled indulgently. I truly mean you no harm, miss. He assured her as the boy opened the package, lifting a green jacket out of it with a black number 10 stitched over the right side of the chest. Wow, this is cool. He slipped the jacket over his shoulders and tried it on. It fits perfectly, too. The professor nodded. I told my old friend that the heroes of this world often wore elaborate costumes, he explained, and though he never truly dressed the part, a similar coat played a pivotal role in his wardrobe. This world, Himiko whispered, wondering what the man was talking about. Izuku grinned at her happily. I promise I'll explain that later, Himiko, he said, looking at the man. Sir. He asked of the professor, what kind of upgrade were you talking about? The man just smiled at him as he reached into his coat pocket, producing what looked like a flash drive. This is an Omnikey, which are keys that unlock certain features locked away inside the Ultimatrix. He said, gesturing for the boy to hold out his Ultimatrix. This one in particular unlocks a feature called the genetic repair system. Izuku looked at him with awe. You mean this thing has healing capabilities? Indeed, the professor said with a smile, though, at the moment, it is limited in its use. Izuku looked at him in confusion. Say that a person had lost a limb. This feature would be unable to restore the lost limb at its present strength, though with each new upgrade, it will gain strength. However, at present, if a person were to suffer severed nerves, and other severe injuries that didn't include lost body parts, then the feature could easily repair the damage. Izuku smiled at that as the man inserted the key into the Ultimatrix. The dial rose up on the face, turning blue for a moment before returning to the normal green and fell back into place. Upgrade complete. The Ultimatrix chimed. Professor Paradox placed the key in Izuku's hand. There, now, he smiled. As it is late, I shall take my leave. Oh, but, Izuku started, but the man shook his head. Your mother is quite right to be put out at me for simply barging in at such a late hour, he reminded the boy while turning his smile on the two women. Next time, I shall knock first, and arrive at a more appropriate hour. He said before turning back to the boy, we will, however, speak again very soon, my young friend. His expression became grave. We will have much to discuss, I fear. Before Izuku could ask what he meant, the man was gone in a flash, literally, leaving the family staring at the spot he had been standing in. Izu. Himiko looked at him, one hand pointing toward the spot the man had disappeared from, and the other pointing at the Ultimatrix. What the body just happened? A phone call is here. A phone call is here. A phone call is here. Toshinori groaned as he rolled over in his bed, reaching for his phone. Who the hell calls in the middle of the night? He moaned as he grasped the phone with half a mind to toss it across the room. But then he saw just who was calling. Night Eye. He accepted the call. This had better be good, Mirai. I suppose I should be thankful that you actually answered my call after our last encounter, Sir Night Eye said from the other end of the line, but I assure you that I have good reason for calling so late. It has something to do with one of the children you seem to be sponsoring. Toshinori sat up on the side of his bed with a tired groan. I'm not sponsoring any of them, thank you very much, the man said, though I'm quite happy with their progress toward their goals. Now, what is it that you've called me about? He heard the detective hero sigh over the phone. It's an unpleasant situation, I'm afraid, Night Eye said. The girl, Hatsume, I believe her name was. I had some records pulled and found that she. Her mother. Her name is Kana Tsutsumi. Toshinori nearly dropped the phone. Please tell that this is your attempt at a bad joke. No, I could never joke about something like this, the man said, but that isn't the only thing that I think you should know about her. Go on, Toshinori said as he got up and headed for the kitchen to make a pot of coffee. Right, Night Eye said, we both know that Ms. Tsutsumi, aka Lady Nagant was imprisoned in Tartarus for assassinating the former president of the HPSC, but I've found out that that is only half of the truth. Toshinori put the phone on speaker and placed it on the countertop. Apparently she was the HPSC's trained assassin. An assassin? Toshinori asked as he filled the pot with water. You mean that sweet young woman I used to know was just a facade? Possibly, Night Eye continued. Keep in mind that I've just uncovered the fact that she is Miss Hatsume's mother. He reminded the man while he filled the coffee maker. But what I've found is that the former president used her to assassinate both terrorists, villains, and heroes. Toshinori started. Heroes? Why? He heard papers shuffling from the phone's speaker. According to the documents I've dug up, she was used to put down heroes that were corrupt and easily bought. He continued. She has the perfect quirk for such work, after all. Rifle? Toshinori recalled with a slight shiver. That quirk of hers always made me uneasy, and I work with Snipe of all people. He said, but why would she turn on the HPSC? More shuffling. Obviously, somewhere along the lines she became pregnant, Night Eye said, and when the child was born, she spent a great deal of time away to care for her. The former president didn't like that. Ah, now I see, he hummed with understanding. Since she was taking so much time away from her duties, he must have said, or done something that put her child in danger. Toshinori sighed as the coffee brewed. If that's the case, then I would have to say that Ms. Tsutsumi was in the right. She was protecting her child from a corrupt politician. Normally I would agree with you, Night Eye said, but the vice president, who went on to replace the former president, decided that it was best that Lady Nagant be put behind bars. He paused for a moment. Surprisingly, Ms. Tsutsumi agreed. Toshinori paused while reaching for a cup. Why would she? I have a statement here, Night Eye said. It would be better for my daughter if she's raised away from me. What kind of mother could I be when my hands are stained with so much blood? I would corrupt her into becoming just like I am now. Toshinori frowned as he mulled over the statement. It's obvious that she feared that raising her daughter would influence her in some way that would lead her into becoming like herself. Toshinori sighed as he poured himself a cup of coffee. It always surprises me just how little my time as the symbol of peace has accomplished. He sighed. Sure, villains behave themselves more if they know that I'm in the area. But those in the government are almost as bad. You mustn't be so hard on yourself, All Might, Night Eye said. There will always be corruption in any government, whether we root them out or not. Someone will always take their place. He sighed before getting back to the matter at hand. There is something else, Toshinori, the real reason that I called. The blonde paused with the cup halfway to his mouth. Normally, since the girl doesn't know anything about her mother, I wouldn't have bothered to call you about this, but the girl's father, a team of police found what was left of him just a few hours ago. Toshinori palmed his face. Dear God, the man set the cup on the counter. Mirai, tell me you haven't said anything to her, yet. No, I thought it best that this particular duty fell to you, since she knows you. Night Eye said with as much sympathy as he could muster. I'm sorry, Toshinori, I know that this will be hard, but. No, Toshinori sighed, you were right to speak with me first. How was he killed? Night Eye seemed to growl from his end of the phone. While I can't prove anything, yet, I think that he may have been involved with one of the last remaining Yakuza groups in Japan, he said, which made Toshinori frown. I don't know if he owed them money, or if he was in the wrong place at the wrong time, but his body was taken apart, as if he had exploded. All that was left was a large splattering of blood, which is how we managed to find enough DNA to figure out who the unlucky fellow was. And only one person in Japan has a quirk that could do such damage, Kaichisaki. Toshinori thought for a moment. I think I've heard of him. From you, no less, he said. Haven't you been after this particular man for quite a while? I have, Night Eye grumbled. Not only is he a cold-blooded murderer, but he's also a trigger dealer, and I suspect much more than that. He sighed, but he never leaves viable witnesses, and those that he leaves alive are unwilling to testify against him. They're that frightened of the man. I see, Toshinori sighed, and you think her father may have had dealings with him? Nothing of the sort, truthfully, Night Eye said. All of the records I pulled on him indicated that the late Natsuo Hatsume, while he was often away on business, he was a very clean person. He continued, not so much as a parking ticket in the last 30-odd years of his life. No, I think he came upon something that he shouldn't have, which gave the Yakuza no choice but to silence him. Toshinori nodded in agreement. Makes sense. He sighed. Thank you for coming for this, Mirai, and keep me informed of your dealings with this man, he said, sounding more serious now. I may not be sponsoring these children, but they've come to mean a great deal to me. I will not allow this man to roam free for much longer. On the other end of the phone, Night Eye sat back in his chair. I know, my old friend, he sighed as the phone line went dead. He sighed and pinched the bridge of his nose in frustration. What are they up to? He wondered as he reached for a photo on his desk, one showing a young man with a black face mask holding a small, white-haired child. Tatooine Junkyard was one of the many places that May frequented for spare parts. Dagobah Beach had been another, but since meeting Izuku, the place had been picked clean, literally thanks to upgrade, of all the raw materials that were there. Now the junkyard, the last place the girl could go to get what she needed, or whatever Izuku needed to make use of his abilities when he transformed into upgrade. May, are you sure about this? Izuku asked as they walked around the area, various vehicles and scraps of iron laying all over the place. I mean, the guy at the gate didn't look too happy to see us. May just scoffed. Nah, he's always like that, she said nonchalantly. Besides, aren't you dying to build the rust bucket number 3? She asked, becoming excited. The cars were one thing, but the schematic you showed me for that craft. She hugged herself and shivered. That was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Izuku grinned at her. Still, though, we should have waited on Shinso. He felt bad for not telling their friend what they were up to. May just rolled her eyes. Are you kidding? He's probably setting something up with that mushroom girl from last night, she said, remembering that both had been pretty taken with each other. She grinned over her shoulder, kinda like you were with that pink girl. She laughed as Izuku blushed. Too bad Himiko couldn't come along, though. She looked pretty bummed out. Izuku flinched as he thought back to the conversation that had taken place earlier that morning. Finding out that her foster brother was basically half alien had been a hard pill to swallow, or at least he had thought it would be. She'd taken it a bit better than he would have imagined. Actually, when he thought about it, Himiko had been very much okay with the idea of being the sister of an extraterrestrial. But then came the jokes. Yeah, she and Mom went out for the day. That was the truth, at least. Inko had decided to drop yet another bomb on the family and let the children know that she and Mr. Yagi had officially started dating. Himiko and Izuku were utterly thrilled, one more so than the other for extremely obvious reasons. I can't believe that All Might's dating my mom, he internally screamed. He made sure that he didn't go off on one of his muttering sprees in front of May on the topic. The last thing he needed was her knowing one of the many secrets he now found himself keeping. At the top of that list was the fact that one of his benefactors was the world's #1 hero. And 2, his other benefactor was an extra-dimensional time traveler. Izuku's life was getting more and more complicated by the day, and he loved it. He thought about it and laughed as he pictured himself all of those months ago. What's so funny? May asked with a look in his direction. Izuku just shook his head. Nothing. He smiled at her. I'm glad I met you guys. May looked at him curiously. You, Shinso, Himiko, even Uraraka and Komori, he said before rubbing the back of his neck bashfully and held up his right wrist. Besides having this, you guys really are the best thing that's ever happened to me. May just looked at him, her cheeks a light shade of pink. Are you trying to get me to kiss you again? She asked with a dubious look on her face. What? The boy went as red as an apple. Of course not. I mean I wouldn't mind it but The boy was waving his arms so frantically that he was practically lifting off the ground. May just giggled, then, without any warning, stepped forward and kissed him. Full on the lips. Izuku, of course, went ramrod still. It was a chaste kiss, however, and when May leaned back she couldn't stop the laugh that bubbled up because of the shocked look on his face, or maybe it was the fact that there was steam coming out of his ears. After a moment, Izuku shook himself back to reality. May, for someone that claims to like girls, you're sending out some really mixed signals. he stammered as the girl laughed. Seriously, why do you keep doing that? Mei gave him a coy look. Now I never said that I liked only girls, now did I? She asked, making Izuku's jaw drop. I said maybe I did. She turned around and continued walking deeper into the junkyard. Besides, you're too cute to resist being nice to. That was you being nice. Izuku muttered as he followed after her. And what about if I get a girlfriend? He asked as the girl looked over her shoulder. You won't keep being nice to me then, will you? Mei just grinned. Maybe, maybe not, she said cryptically. Depends on if she'd mind being kissed by a girl like me, I guess. You guess. Izuku yelped while Mei skipped ahead. Hey, wait a minute, Mei. He chased after her. Come back here. Then keep up, slowpoke. The girl called back laughingly. The pile I wanted you to check out is just around the next corner. She raced ahead of him, darting around a large mound of scrapped metal with the boy trailing behind her. Tada! Mei shouted with smile as if she were unveiling a masterpiece. What do you think of this? Izuku bumbled around the corner and looked up at what Mei was presenting. Oh, wow. The boy's eyes nearly popped out of his head. What the heck's a Pegasus doing here? The Pegasus, as Izuku had named it, was an old Eastern European eVTOL used by large companies which replaced most private jets as luxury planes. They were fast, durable, and easily flyable. I don't know, really, Mei said with a beaming smile. Best guess is that a rich hero had it for a few years before it got scrapped and sent here. She frowned at the machine's condition, and this one took one hell of a beating. She pointed to the exposed right wing of the craft. Something hit the wing with enough force to nearly shred it off. She then pointed to the cockpit, and I noticed that there were some old blood stains in the pilot's chair, so whatever happened wasn't great. She turned to Izuku. So, think you can use this thing for the rust bucket? Izuku's face split into a wide grin. Oh, yeah, he reached for the Ultimatrix. I definitely can. He dialed in the transformation and slammed his hand down. Mei knew enough to shield her eyes ahead of time as the blinding green flash erupted from around her friend. Upgrade. Mei looked at the giant mechamorph. Hey, I've always wondered something, she said as the teen moved toward the pile of junk containing the VTOL. How come you always shout the name of your mutations when you change into them? Upgrade paused a moment to think, raising a finger to his non-existent mouth. You know what? I don't know. Mei tilted her head in confusion. It just happens. Sorta like a reflex, I guess. Mei shrugged. Well, whatever, she said as she stepped back to let the galvanic mechamorph work. Man, I can't wait to see this new baby. Upgrade laughed as his body melted into goop and started swarming over the junk-covered plane. You mean you can't wait to tinker with it? He laughed while his body spread over the junk. Man, there's a lot in here. He commented as the nanites in his body started breaking down and storing the materials inside. I think there's another car in here. Cool, Mei squealed giddily. We could actually make it into a real piece of support tech, this time. Upgrade suddenly reached out to another pile of junk and started absorbing it as well. I need some more material, he explained as he moved to another pile. Mei was looking at the living blob with curiosity. Just what are you planning here, Izuku? You'll see, the boy alien said as he began to shrink back down to normal size for Upgrade. Ah, man, I feel so full, he said and tapped the Ultimatrix symbol on his chest to change back. And it's gone. He grumbled. I could really go for a cheeseburger right now. Mei had a look of disappointment on her face. How come you didn't build the ship? She asked with a pout. I was really looking forward to that. Izuku shrugged. Well, I figured we'd do that when we left here. He jerked his thumb over at the entrance of the yard. I mean, aren't we technically stealing? PSH, that's what you're worried about. Mei laughed. I take junk out of here all the time, and the old coot never gives me flack about it. Yeah, but do you ever tell him what you're doing? Izuku asked with his arms crossed, and his brow raised. Mei just placed her arms behind her head, so I might've come in over the back fence a few times. That's what I thought, Izuku sighed. At least this way we don't have to worry about him snapping at us. I probably shouldn't ask this, but how is this any different than what I was doing before? Mei asked skeptically. In answer, Izuku patted his stomach. Technically, the stuff that upgrade absorbed no longer exists, so we can't really steal something that doesn't exist, right? He grinned as Mei's jaw just dropped. A few seconds later, both of them burst out laughing. I blame you for this, Izuku said, wiping a stray tear. Before I met you, I never would have considered stealing scrap metal. Mei held her stomach as she giggled. Hey, think of it this way, she laughed, most of this stuff is gonna go toward waste heaps and landfills. She gestured to the scrap piles. It's kinda why I get away with so much. This place isn't one of the recycling yards. It's just a cheap place for people to bring their scraps and garbage, just like the beach was until you cleaned it up. That was one more plus to add to his list since obtaining the Ultimatrix. He had used Upgrade to clean the entire beach of the garbage littering it, and now it was a very popular spot for people to go and unwind. You know, after we get our letters from UA, we should do something there, he said as the two of them headed back toward the entrance. Like what? Mei asked. The boy just shrugged. Well, I don't know, he muttered, a cookout or something like a party to celebrate. He grinned at her as she nodded in understanding. Whatcha think? I like the idea, but, she trailed off, looking at him skeptically. Are you sure that we all got in? Izuku frowned, stroking his chin as he walked. I think we did, he muttered with uncertainty. I mean, I can't be sure, but I just have this feeling that we all made it. You, me, Shinso, and Himiko. And what about those other 3 girls that went with us to the burger joint? She asked as she recalled the 2 brunettes and the all-pink girl with horns that they had not so subtly pushed him toward. Are you sure that they got in, too? She wondered. If they didn't, and we had a party to celebrate getting in, then wouldn't it be like rubbing salt in their wounds? Izuku grimaced. I didn't think of that, he sighed, but I just feel like all of this work is going to work out just fine. Mei sighed and gave a small shrug. Fine. But don't come whining to me if maybe 1 or 2 of us don't make it. She crossed her arms behind her head again as they passed by the grouchy attendant, who didn't even spare them a glance as he read his newspaper. Speaking of those girls, have you even talked to that Pinky since the entrance exams? Izuku jerked to a halt. No, Mei yelled suddenly while scrabbling her hands in her hair. Are you kidding me? She demanded of the boy. You'll never get a girlfriend if you keep up this shy as hell routine of yours. I can't help it. Izuku backpedaled. I mean it's not like how it is with you. She glared at him with her eyes narrowed. That came out wrong. He yelped. I bet it did, she muttered. Just what do you mean it's not like it is with me? She demanded with a huff. Izuku scrambled for an answer. I mean I'm used to you, he muttered, but the girl just looked on in confusion. I mean, you practically live with me, Mei, and I'm used to, well, all of it. Except the kissing, Mei pointed out with a giggle, but I don't do that often, and I don't plan on it unless you just keep screwing things up like this. Izuku frowned as she walked ahead of him toward the street. What? You mean you'd be my pity girlfriend or something? And a mercy body if you asked for it, she said without missing a beat, causing Izuku to fall flat on his face. Well, think about it. She laughed as the boy picked himself up from the ground. Who else would it be? Someone I don't think of as a sister, Izuku asked with a shaky grin and a small line of blood leaking from his nose. The images that she had just planted in his head had been surprising, yet normal all things considered. He saw her naked on a regular basis. Mei put her hands on her hips and huffed. Then you'd better get your head out of your ass, and take things a little more seriously with this girl, she said before reaching out and yanking the boy back to his feet. If it helps, change into a mutant, and give yourself a confidence boost, she suggested as Izuku dusted himself off. But don't be too hard on yourself, Izuku, 'cause I know you will. That I can't really help, either, the boy said whilst rubbing the back of his neck. I mean I've been told I'm plain looking for most of my life except by my mom. And I told you that I thought you were cute, Mei reminded him with a grin. Think I'm lying? Izuku shook his head. Well, no, I guess not. I just don't see it. He shrugged. Mei just rolled her eyes. Trust me, someday someone is going to look at you, and see the most handsome boy she's ever known. she said with a sigh as she turned around and started back toward the entrance. Come on, we should get back and see what Himiko and Mama Inko are up to. Why the hell do I have to come along, old hag? Katsuki demanded as his mother drove them to the Midoriya's apartment complex. I don't even care about Deku. Mitsuki looked at him in the rearview mirror. You're coming along because it's high time that you at least made an attempt at an apology, you brat, she snapped with half the heat that she normally had when reprimanding her son. As of late, things had come to light about his behavior that she had not been made aware of until recently when she had asked Toshinori for some information on Aldera. Besides that, Masaru muttered as he drove, from the sound of things, Inko's going to need all the support she can get. He sighed, casting a look of his own at his son, and I will not allow you to go out with those friends of yours that think bullying is fun. He said, you realize that if Izuku had wanted it, you would have been sent straight to juvenile detention for what you've done. Katsuki's palms started smoking, and if you use your quirk for a single pop, young man, I'll have you pulled from the hero course, and placed in general studies, Mitsuki snapped at him when she smelled the smoke moving through the car. I don't know what that boy did to you to make you hate him so much, but it ends now. Katsuki held his tongue. They wouldn't understand, even if I told them, he thought, his mind going back to that day 10 years ago when he fell into the creek. The fact that Izuku the Deku had been quirkless made him the last person that he thought would show him sympathy, but that one moment had set him on fire, and his resentment toward the weakling had only grown over the years. Where did he get off thinking I'm weak enough to need help from him? Masaru sighed, thankful that the boy hadn't started another argument before getting to the apartment complex. It wouldn't do poor Inko any good to have them fighting over who knows what in front of her. Here we are, he said as he pulled into the parking lot, noticing a familiar white truck sitting on the curb. It looks like Mr. Yagi's here, too. Who? Katsuki asked. Inko's new boyfriend. His mother giggled, her son gaining a bug-eyed look. Oh, that's right, you didn't know about the divorce. She said, this is why you need to come down whenever we have company. She admonished, you'd learn a few things about the people around you, and how to act around them. Like I care. He huffed and turned his head toward the window. Masaru frowned at him. You had better care, he told the boy. Remember that young woman that you've been hung up on is also Inko's foster child. He saw his son's left brow begin twitching. That was quite the handprint you were sporting, too. He chuckled when he remembered questioning his son about that slap. Snarling, the boy got out of the car and headed for the stairs. Katsuki, we're taking the elevator. His mother shouted after, get your ass back here. I'm talking the stairs, he roared back. Son, Masaru shouted, you listen to your mother, and I mean now. He halted, then grudgingly started toward the elevator where his mother was already waiting. She cuffed him behind the neck. You're going to learn some better manners, young man, or you will be in for a rough ride when school starts. The only difference is that I'll be learning to be a hero, the boy grumbled while his father joined them. The man only laughed. I think you'll find that that's not the case, he said. Not only have I heard that one of their teachers in the hero course expelled his entire class last year, but there were several students that were put into the school through recommendations. None of them were forced to go through what you did, son. They were that much better. Like hell they were. The boy snapped at the man, which was normally enough to shut him up, but he only smiled at his son, shaking his head. He remained quiet for the remainder of the ride up, both of his parents keeping a hand on his shoulders to keep him from rushing ahead of them and stirring up trouble. When they reached the apartment, they were greeted by a very somber-looking Inko. Mitsuki, Masaru, she smiled at the two parents, a smaller, less inviting smile going toward their son, Katsuki. She nodded before turning her attention back to his parents. I'm glad you could come. Mitsuki took in the woman's reddened eyes. Inko, you've been crying. She let go of her son and reached for her oldest friend. Oh, sweetie, what's happened? Is it something to do with Hisashi? Masaru asked, wondering if her former husband had decided to cause her trouble because of the divorce. The woman shook her head. No, it has nothing to do with him. She sighed as she invited them inside, the Bakugos finding the Midoriya household quite full. Katsuki recognized a few of their faces. The girl that had slapped him, claiming Deku and Auntie Inko as her family. The lazy-looking boy with purple hair. And the skinny-ass blonde geezer that had claimed to be an agent from Mike Towers. There were two other girls, one a brunette with a bob cut that hung down over her eyes, and a totally pink girl with raccoon eyes. Who the hell were all these extras? Mina, dear, Mitsuki cried in delight as she saw the pink-skinned girl. How are you, sweetie? The girl smiled back at her. I've been great, Mrs. Bakugo. Ah, this must be the girl that you wanted for your winter exposé, her husband chuckled while the girl just gave a lovely blush of lavender. And I can see why. She'd look wonderful in a lot of the outfits that you have drawn up. Wouldn't she, though? Mitsuki giggled as her eyes landed on the young brunette. And who do we have here? Another lovely young talent. She smiled as the girl gave a small squeak and hid behind Shinso. Mitsuki giggled, deciding not to torment her just yet as she greeted the blonde man. Toshinori, always a pleasure. And congratulations to both you and Inko, she said while the new couple blushed. You'd better keep her happy, or you'll definitely have hell to pay. Her happiness is all that I want, the man said with a small smile, though it didn't reach his eyes, but I'm afraid that today's topic isn't going to be a part of that. He sighed, looking over at Inko. Are they on their way? Inko nodded. Yes, according to Izuku, they've just turned down our street, she said as she took a seat next to Himiko. A short time later, the two they were waiting on came through the door. Katsuki easily recognized them both. One had been a constant thorn in his side since he'd met him, while the other was another Pinky. Inko smiled at the pair. I'm sorry to ruin your fun by calling you back so soon. Izuku hesitated when he saw the room full of people, including, to his surprise, the Bakugos, but he gave his mother a smile anyway. No need to worry, Mom, he said, we were on our way back, anyway. He said before looking around, blushing when he saw Mina waving at him. May snickered and elbowed him in the side, and he pushed her away. So what's with all the guests? I'm afraid that's my doing, my boy, Toshinori said, gesturing for them to sit down. May saw that the only seats available were next to Mina, so the girl nudged him toward the couch where she sat him down, and took up the seat next to him. I'm afraid that I have some rather, well, there's no sugarcoating it, it's bad news. Shinso frowned. We didn't make the cut for UA, did we? He asked with a sigh. Should have known. Kanoko reached out and patted his arm. At least we'll still have general studies. Right, she asked, foregoing her usual mushroom puns. Toshinori chuckled and waved his hand to dismiss the notion. Oh, no, that's not it at all, he said. As a matter of fact, I took the liberty of getting your results from Principal Nezu early. Inko smiled at the man. Perhaps you could let them hear them first, she asked. It might take the sting out of all of this. Toshinori nodded, looking around the room. I can access all of your scores, if you'd like, he asked as he reached into his coat to bring out a data pad. Hell yeah, Mina shouted happily. I've been on pins and needles since the exams. Shroom here, Kanoko piped up, but what about Ochako? Toshinori chuckled. Ah, I wasn't able to reach her, he said, but I can tell you right now that she passed. The girl smiled in relief. Toshinori then turned to the Bakugos. First off, Katsuki Bakugo with a solid score of 70 combat points. And a 99 on the written exams. Katsuki just grinned. His father patted him on the back. Good job, son. Toshinori nodded. Indeed, he came in third place in the grand total. Third, Katsuki's eye began to twitch violently. Next, with a combat score of 50 rescue points, and a perfect score in the written exams, he smiled toward Izuku. Izuku Midoriya comes in at first place with a grand total of 100 overall points. All right, Shinso grinned at him while May and Mina high-fived him. Who got second place? Himiko asked. Toshinori smiled at the girl. Second place was a tie between yourself and Miss Ishido for your work in herding the crowd away from the 0-point robot as well as Miss Ishido's heroic display in getting you to safety. The man laughed at the girl's shocked expression before Mina squealed and leaned over to hug the blonde. And while you both didn't make it to the top 10, young Shinso-yu, Miss Komori, and Miss Uraraka have all passed with flying colors. He smiled at Shinso. What about me? May asked hopefully. Toshinori tapped a few keys on the pad and cleared his throat. Mei Hatsume has been accepted into UA's support item course with top marks. But is advised against making any more exploding tech for the foreseeable future. Izuku grinned at her as the girl just stuck her tongue at him. It wasn't my fault, she argued while crossing her arms. Some moron decided to try and sabotage me. Power Loader even caught it on video. Sure it was, Shinso said mockingly. Oh, screw you, Mento. Mei snapped. The adults laughed at the banter while Izuku and Mina tried to calm Mei down. Ahem, as pleasant as this news is, Inko interjected, looking at Toshinori with sad eyes. I think it's time for what you came to tell her. She sighed. Toshinori nodded, running a hand through his hair. You're right, he muttered before looking straight at Hatsume. Young lady. How close are you to your father? Mei shrugged. About as close as you'd expect, she said truthfully. Ever since I learned to take care of myself, he's been gone a lot on out-of-town projects. Sometimes for days, or weeks at a time, she said, but he always calls to check in on me, and makes sure the house is fully stocked with food, bills are paid, and all that. And we always take time to talk and catch up whenever we have the time. She said, giving the man a look of confusion. Why? The man took a breath. Well, dear, I don't know how you'll take this. He scrubbed his face with his palm. Early this morning, I received a call from Night Eye's agency, and he reported to me that your father's remains had been found. He didn't know what he was expecting as the others who hadn't already heard the news gasped around them. The Bakugos, including their son, looked sufficiently shocked by the news. Izuku, Hitoshi, Komori and Ashido looked horrified, of course. Mei, however, had gone deathly pale. Her crosshair-like pupils had shrunk down to non-existent size, and he could see a light layer of sweat beading across her skin. He moved forward just in time as the girl's eyes rolled back and her body went slack. He just barely managed to catch her with Izuku and Mina's help before she hit the floor. Inko and Mitsuki yelled in alarm while Masaru jumped over the back of the couch to help Toshinori carry her to the spare bedroom. A short time later both women had the girl tucked away in bed, deciding that rest was better for her at the moment. Toshinori sighed as he sat down in one of the armchairs. I should have seen that coming. He muttered as Masaru handed him a cup of tea that Inko had brewed. Come on, now, Toshi, the man sighed, something like this can never be easy. Toshinori nodded. I admit that I'm glad to be out of practice, he muttered as he took a sip. Telling someone that their loved ones are no more was not easy when I was young, and it sure as hell isn't any easier now, especially concerning a little girl. Mitsuki was sitting with Inko holding onto the woman's hands in comfort. Doesn't she have any other relatives, or was it just her and her father? The man shook his head slowly. No, her father was an orphan, and he had no ties with whatever family he might have had, he said, sitting back. Her mother, on the other hand. Izuku came back into the room with Mina trailing next to him. Himiko's keeping an eye on her for now, he told his mother, but it doesn't look like she's waking up anytime soon. Inko nodded. It would be amazing if she did, she sighed. It was quite a shock. She looked at her son. I know that I don't need to ask, dear, but since Mei's. I already talked it over with Hitoshi and Miss Ashido. He gave Mina a grateful look while the girl gave him a bright smile. We can start moving her things out of her house as soon as tomorrow. Masaru looked at her. You're taking her in? He asked with a look around the apartment. No offense, Inko, but this place is small. I know. Inko smiled sadly, before giving Mitsuki's hand a squeeze, but I decided to take Mitsuki's advice about using some of that money from my divorce settlement. I've found a very nice two-story house near UA. She told the woman. I was just waiting on the children's letters to arrive before committing to making the purchase. Toshinori smiled at her. That's wonderful to hear, Inko. And I'm sure that Mei will appreciate the gesture. Inko laughed softly. She's already like my own daughter, just like Himiko. She smiled. I couldn't live with myself if I didn't try to help her. Toshinori nodded in understanding. Before we can do anything about her living conditions, he sighed. We have to meet with her one living relative before the legal system catches up with us and tries to put her in a home. I thought she didn't have any other family. Mina asked, looking up at Izuku. You said that her mom wasn't around anymore. Izuku shrugged. She told me that her mom passed away just after she was born. He explained with a frown. Toshinori just shook his head. That is simply what her mother asked her to be told. The man laced his fingers together. Her mother is an inmate at Tartarus. Paradox sighed as he returned to his little pocket dimension and found Anastasia waiting for him. I take it that you have seen the beginnings of what could be a very steep downward spiral. The High Celestial nodded slowly. There is so much pain, she said, her tone sad, and it is only from a single person that this darkness begins to take root. Paradox nodded. That is very true, he said as he leaned heavily on his cane. However, I think that it can be subverted so that this child does not fall. Anastasia looked at him sadly. Paradox, have you not seen just how deeply this pain has the potential to infect your champion? A wave of her hand showed Izuku, his body worn and scarred. Look how this boy's future has changed from the simple act of gifting him the Ultimatrix. His clothes were tattered as he stood over the lifeless form of an enemy. His eyes did not hold the same light they had come to emit in the timeline that he had been gifted the Ultimatrix. No one stood by his side. She waved her hand again, and the image of Izuku changed to one of a smiling young man, his arms slung over the shoulders of both Hitoshi Shinso and Mei Hatsume, all of them worn from battle. The Ultimatrix was displayed proudly on his right wrist, glimmering in the sun like a sword in the hand of a knight. He wore the same jacket that Paradox had gifted him. Though it was ripped and torn in several places, he looked well. On his right, Shinso was grinning at him tiredly, blood and dust covering part of his forehead and the left side of his face. He wore a black trenchcoat with a Kevlar vest beneath. On his right, Mei looked like she was laughing, her right eye closed as a line blood ran down her face, a rifle slung across her back. And now darkness has settled in this child's heart, she said as the scene changed again, showing the snarling Hatsume standing over someone with pure hatred in her eyes as she pointed a gun at someone. And from her darkness, more shall rise. Another image showed Shinso glaring at someone, his eyes glowing dangerously red. Himiko then appeared crouched over someone, blood staining her porcelain skin of her face while long fangs protruded from her lips. Then what could have been the cruelest of all futures appeared. Izuku, the boy he had chosen to gift the Ultimatrix to, holding the lifeless body of a pink-skinned girl in his arms while a being dressed in black stood above him. All of these children, Anastasia said as Paradox felt sick from seeing the dark futures laid before him, have the potential for the greatest of evils that their world has ever seen. The image of Izuku holding the girl changed to one of the same boy with his face twisted with fury as a red Ultimatrix symbol appeared on his chest, even the most gentle of them all. Paradox sighed. I realize that, dear lady, the man said with a heavy tone, which is why I feel that I must keep closer tabs on this world. He pointed his stick at Dimension Omega. There are no celestial sapiens here to keep the order of space and time in balance. My lady, he sighed, after this dimension experienced heat death, it was an impossible miracle that life found purchase here. He looked at her sadly. I know that your people dislike my interference, however this dimension is in dire need. Anastasia shook her head. I understand, Paradox. However, others of my race are not so understanding, she said, turning her attention back to the darkened images of the children. Where you see the saviors of this world, they would see the destroyers. Her eyes were sad as she regarded the image of Izuku Midoriya. As it stands, each one of them shall reach a point in their lives where they will be tested. And should they fail, it will fall to your chosen one to bring them to heal. Professor Paradox turned his eyes back to the happier images. I know that what you say is true, and that it could very easily come to pass. A small smile came to his lips as he noted the smiles on the children's face. But I believe that they will surprise you. In the end, will you please allow me to continue to watch over and aid them? The High Celestial nodded. I wish to see them succeed, she said as the image captivated her. I will attempt to dissuade others from interfering with this world. Thank you. To be continued. I hope you enjoyed this story. Also remember to subscribe and like this video. See you in the next video.